I'm standing in the rain outside Seattle Memorial Hospital at 11 p.m., staring at an empty parking space where my car should be. My 2021 Camry. The one I worked double shifts for 3 years to buy. $30,000. Finally paid off 6 months ago. The first thing I've ever truly owned. Gone. My hands are shaking as I call my parents. Maybe it was towed. Maybe there's been some mistake. "Oh, honey," my mother says like she's talking to a child. "We gave the car to Sophie. She needed it more than you. You live close to work anyway." Sophie, my 30-year-old sister who's totaled 4 cars in 6 years, who's never held a job longer than 8 months, who gets everything handed to her while I get this. "You gave away my car." I can barely breathe. Without even asking me, "Don't be dramatic, Emily. It's just a car. Family helps family." Something inside me breaks. Or maybe wakes up. Because here's what I'm about to discover: that car was just the beginning. My parents didn't just betray me, they've been systematically destroying my life for years, stealing my inheritance, hiding secrets that will shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. But they made one critical mistake. They pushed the wrong daughter too far. So I hung up that phone, stood in the rain, and made a decision that would tear my family apart and expose crimes they never thought would see the light of day. I called 911. And that single call started a chain reaction that would send my father to prison for life. My name is Emily Parker. I'm 34 years old, and I've been a registered nurse at Seattle Memorial Hospital for the past 8 years. I've always been the responsible one. The daughter who did everything right, who never caused trouble, who worked hard and asked for nothing. But on this cold November night, standing in an empty parking space in the rain, I'm about to learn that being good doesn't protect you from the people who are supposed to love you most. The shift had been brutal. 12 hours on the cardiac floor. 3 code blues, 1 patient who coded twice and somehow pulled through, and Mrs. Chen in room 412, who held my hand while she cried about her daughter who never visits. My scrubs were still damp from when I'd helped clean up Mr. Rodriguez after his IV line pulled out, leaving blood spattered across my shoulder. My feet ached in my nursing clogs, and all I wanted was to drive home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the employee entrance at exactly 11:07 p.m. The Seattle rain hit me immediately, that persistent November drizzle that's more mist than drops, the kind that soaks through your jacket before you realize you're wet. The parking lot stretched out before me, mostly empty now, except for a few scattered vehicles belonging to the night shift crew. The overhead lights flickered and buzzed, casting yellow pools across the wet asphalt. I pulled my jacket tighter and headed toward my usual spot. Number 247. I'd parked there almost every day for 5 years, ever since I'd finally saved enough for a down payment on my own car. Before that, I'd taken the bus, spending 2 hours a day in transit, standing in the rain, at stops, arriving home exhausted, and still needing to make dinner. The Camry had been my reward for all those years of sacrifice, my first real taste of independence and adult success. But when I reached spot 247, there was nothing there, just wet pavement and the faded yellow line marking the space's boundary. I stopped walking, my mind trying to process what I was seeing, or rather what I wasn't seeing. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd made a mistake. Maybe I'd parked in a different section today. I'd been so rushed this morning, running late after staying up too late working on my recertification paperwork. Maybe I'd parked in the temporary lot by the south entrance. But no, I could picture it clearly pulling in this morning, noting with satisfaction that 247 was open, the little ritual of backing in so I could pull out easily at the end of my shift. I always backed in. Always. My heart started to pound, that sick feeling spreading through my chest that something was very, very wrong. I looked around the parking lot as if the car might materialize somewhere else, as if it had somehow moved itself. A few spaces down, I could see Linda Morrison's beat-up Honda. She worked nights in the ER. Across the way, Dr. Patel's Tesla sat charging at the station. But my Camry, My beautiful silver 2021 Camry, with the small dent in the rear bumper from when I'd backed into a post at the grocery store, was simply gone. Stolen. It had to be stolen. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone, nearly dropping it twice before I managed to unlock it. I should call the police, I thought. That's what you do when your car is stolen. You call the police. But something made me call my parents first. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was years of conditioning that family comes first, that you handle things within the family before involving outsiders. My mother answered on the third ring, her voice bright and chipper despite the late hour. "Emily, sweetheart, what's wrong? Aren't you supposed to be at work?" "Mom, my car is gone." The words came out strangled somewhere between panic and confusion. "I just got off shift and it's not in the parking lot. I think someone stole it." There was a pause. Not the shocked, horrified pause I expected. Just a pause, like she was trying to figure out how to phrase something. "Oh, honey," she said finally, and her tone was so casual it made my skin prickle. "We gave the car to Sophie. She needed it more than you do." The rain continued to fall. Somewhere in the distance, an ambulance siren wailed. I could hear my own breathing too loud in my ears. "What?" It was all I could manage. "Your sister's car broke down again and she needs reliable transportation for her new job. You live so close to the hospital you're practically within walking distance. And there's that nice bus line that runs right past your apartment. It made sense to let Sophie use the Camry." "Let Sophie use..." I couldn't even finish the sentence. "Mom, that's my car. I bought it. I made every payment for 3 years. Well, technically your father co-signed the loan, so it's really a family car, isn't it?" Her voice had taken on that patient, slightly condescending tone she used when she thought I was being difficult. "Don't be dramatic, Emily. It's just a car. Family helps family. You know Sophie's been having a hard time lately."
"Oh, true."
Sophie's been having a hard time. Sophie, who was 30 years old and had wrecked 4 cars in the past 6 years. Sophie, who'd lost 3 jobs in 2 years because she couldn't bother to show up on time. Sophie, who lived rent-free in our parents' basement and had never paid for anything herself in her entire life. And now she had my car. I could hear my father's voice in the background, muffled but unmistakable. "Tell her to stop being dramatic. It's just a car. She can take the bus like she used to." Something inside me shifted in that moment. Not broke-breaking implies damage weakness. No, this was something else. Something cold and clear settling over me like ice water. For 34 years, I had been the good daughter. The responsible one. The one who worked hard, who didn't complain, who made things easy for everyone else. I'd put myself through nursing school while Sophie dropped out of community college 3 times. I'd helped pay for family vacations I was too busy working to attend. I'd smiled and nodded and swallowed every slight, every dismissal, every moment of being overlooked because keeping the peace was what good daughters did. But standing in that parking lot, rain soaking through my jacket, my feet aching, still smelling like hospital disinfectant and other people's blood, I realized something I was done. "Emily. Emily, are you still there? You're not going to make a big deal about this, are you?" My mother's voice had an edge of worry now. She knew that tone, that silence. She'd never heard it from me before. I hung up without saying goodbye. My hand was steady now as I dialed 911. The operator answered on the first ring. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report a stolen vehicle. I said, my voice calm and clear. My 2021 Toyota Camry. License plate number. I rattled off the number I'd memorized years ago. Within 20 minutes, a Seattle PD patrol car pulled into the parking lot, lights flashing blue and red across the wet pavement. Officer Martinez was in his 40s with kind eyes and a notebook already in hand. He took down my information, asked me when I'd last seen the vehicle, whether I'd given anyone permission to use it. No, I said firmly. No one had my permission. He went back to his patrol car to run the registration. I stood in the rain watching him type on his computer terminal, the blue glow of the screen reflecting off his face. When he came back, his expression had changed. Not suspicious exactly, but careful. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "according to our records, this vehicle was never registered in your name alone. There's a co-owner listed, Robert Parker, your father." The ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What?" "The car is registered to both you and Robert Parker. He has equal legal ownership. Which means if he gave permission for someone else to use the vehicle, that's not technically theft." I stared at him, my mind racing back to 3 years ago. The day I'd bought the car. My father insisting he needed to co-sign the loan because my credit wasn't quite good enough on its own. I'd been so grateful, so touched that he was willing to help me. I'd never thought to check the actual paperwork, never imagined that co-signing a loan meant he'd be listed as a co-owner. Which meant that for 3 years, while I'd made every single payment, while I'd paid for insurance and gas and maintenance, while I'd believed this car was mine, my first real possession, my symbol of independence and hard work, my father had maintained legal control over it. And now he'd given it away. To Sophie. Without asking me. Without even telling me. Officer Martinez was still talking something about civil matters and family disputes, but I barely heard him. All I could think was, what else? What else had they taken from me while I smiled and nodded and played the role of the good daughter I was about to find out? And it was going to be so much worse than a stolen car. My name is Emily Parker. I'm 34 years old and I've been a registered nurse at Seattle Memorial Hospital for the past 8 years. I've always been the responsible one, the daughter who did everything right, who never caused trouble, who worked hard and asked for nothing. But on this cold November night, standing in an empty parking space in the rain, I'm about to learn that being good doesn't protect you from the people who are supposed to love you most. The shift had been brutal. 12 hours on the cardiac floor, 3 code blues, 1 patient who coded twice and somehow pulled through, and Mrs. Chen in room 412, who held my hand while she cried about her daughter who never visits. My scrubs were still damp from when I'd helped clean up Mr. Rodriguez after his IV line pulled out, leaving blood spattered across my shoulder. My feet ached in my nursing clogs, and all I wanted was to drive home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the employee entrance at exactly 11:07 p.m. The Seattle rain hit me immediately, that persistent November drizzle that's more mist than drops, the kind that soaks through your jacket before you realize you're wet. The parking lot stretched out before me, mostly empty now, except for a few scattered vehicles belonging to the night shift crew. The overhead lights flickered and buzzed, casting yellow pools across the wet asphalt. I pulled my jacket tighter and headed toward my usual spot. Number 247. I'd parked there almost every day for 5 years, ever since I'd finally saved enough for a down payment on my own car. Before that, I'd taken the bus, spending 2 hours a day in transit, standing in the rain at stops, arriving home exhausted and still needing to make dinner. The Camry had been my reward for all those years of sacrifice, my first real taste of independence and adult success. But when I reached spot 247, there was nothing there. Just wet pavement and the faded yellow line marking the space's boundary. I stopped walking, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. Or rather, what I wasn't seeing. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd made a mistake. Maybe I'd parked in a different section today. I'd been so rushed this morning, running late, after staying up too late working on my recertification paperwork. Maybe I'd parked in the temporary lot by the south entrance. But no. I could picture it clearly pulling in this morning, noting with satisfaction that 247 was open, the little ritual of backing in, so I could pull out easily at the end of my shift. I always backed in, always. My heart started to pound, that sick feeling spreading through my chest that something was very, very wrong. I looked around the parking lot as if the car might materialize somewhere else, as if it had somehow moved itself. A few spaces down, I could see Linda Morrison's beat-up Honda. She worked nights in the ER. Across the way, Dr. Patel's Tesla sat charging at the station. But my Camry, my beautiful silver 2021 Camry with the small dent in the rear bumper from when I'd backed into a post at the grocery store, was simply gone. Stolen. It had to be stolen. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone, nearly dropping it twice before I managed to unlock it. I should call the police, I thought. That's what you do when your car is stolen. You call the police. But something made me call my parents first. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was years of conditioning that family comes first, that you handle things within the family before involving outsiders. My mother answered on the third ring, her voice bright and chipper despite the late hour. "Emily, sweetheart, what's wrong? Aren't you supposed to be at work?" "Mom, my car is gone." The words came out strangled, somewhere between panic and confusion. "I just got off shift and it's not in the parking lot. I think someone stole it." There was a pause. Not the shocked, horrified pause I expected. Just a pause, like she was trying to figure out how to phrase something. "Oh, honey," she said finally, and her tone was so casual it made my skin prickle. "We gave the car to Sophie. She needed it more than you do." The rain continued to fall. Somewhere in the distance, an ambulance siren wailed. I could hear my own breathing too loud in my ears. "What?" It was all I could manage. "Your sister's car broke down again and she needs reliable transportation for her new job. You live so close to the hospital, you're practically within walking distance. And there's that nice bus line that runs right past your apartment. It made sense to let Sophie use the Camry." "Let Sophie use..." I couldn't even finish the sentence. "Mom, that's my car. I bought it. I made every payment for 3 years." "Well, technically, your father co-signed the loan, so it's really a family car, isn't it?" Her voice had taken on that patient, slightly condescending tone she used when she thought I was being difficult. "Don't be dramatic, Emily. It's just a car. Family helps family. You know Sophie's been having a hard time lately." Sophie's been having a hard time. Sophie, who was 30 years old and had wrecked 4 cars in the past 6 years. Sophie, who'd lost 3 jobs in 2 years because she couldn't bother to show up on time. Sophie, who lived rent-free in our parents' basement and had never paid for anything herself in her entire life. And now she had my car. I could hear my father's voice in the background, muffled but unmistakable. "Tell her to stop being dramatic. It's just a car. She can take the bus like she used to." Something inside me shifted in that moment. Not broke-breaking implies damage weakness. No, this was something else. Something cold and clear settling over me like ice water. For 34 years, I had been the good daughter. The responsible one. The one who worked hard, who didn't complain, who made things easy for everyone else. I'd put myself through nursing school while Sophie dropped out of community college 3 times. I'd helped pay for family vacations I was too busy working to attend. I'd smiled and nodded and swallowed every slight, every dismissal, every moment of being overlooked because keeping the peace was what good daughters did. But standing in that parking lot, rain soaking through my jacket, my feet aching, still smelling like hospital disinfectant and other people's blood, I realized something. I was done. "Emily, Emily, are you still there? You're not going to make a big deal about this, are you?" My mother's voice had an edge of worry now. She knew that tone, that silence. She'd never heard it from me before. I hung up without saying goodbye. My hand was steady now as I dialed 911. The operator answered on the first ring. 911, what's your emergency?" "I need to report a stolen vehicle," I said, my voice calm and clear. "My 2021 Toyota Camry, license plate number..." I rattled off the number I'd memorized years ago. Within 20 minutes, a Seattle PD patrol car pulled into the parking lot, lights flashing blue and red across the wet pavement. Officer Martinez was in his 40s with kind eyes and a notebook already in hand. He took down my information, asked me when I'd last seen the vehicle whether I'd given anyone permission to use it. "No," I said firmly. "No one had my permission." He went back to his patrol car to run the registration. I stood in the rain watching him type on his computer terminal, the blue glow of the screen reflecting off his face. When he came back, his expression had changed. Not suspicious exactly, but careful. "Ma'am," he said slowly, According to our records, this vehicle was never registered in your name alone. There's a co-owner listed, Robert Parker, your father." The ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What?" "The car is registered to both you and Robert Parker. He has equal legal ownership, which means if he gave permission for someone else to use the vehicle, that's not technically theft." I stared at him, my mind racing back to 3 years ago, the day I'd bought the car. My father insisting he needed to co-sign the loan because my credit wasn't quite good enough on its own. I'd been so grateful, so touched that he was willing to help me. I'd never thought to check the actual paperwork, never imagined that co-signing a loan meant he'd be listed as a co-owner, which meant that for 3 years, while I'd made every single payment, while I'd paid for insurance and gas and maintenance, while I'd believed this car was mine, my first real possession, my symbol of independence and hard work, my father had maintained legal control over it. And now he'd given it away. To Sophie. Without asking me. Without even telling me. Officer Martinez was still talking something about civil matters and family disputes, but I barely heard him. All I could think was, what else? What else had they taken from me, while I smiled and nodded and played the role of the good daughter I was about to find out? And it was going to be so much worse than a stolen car. Officer Martinez suggested I come down to the station to go over the registration details more thoroughly. I rode with him, I should say, since I no longer had a car of my own. The police station was a squat concrete building that smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner. He led me to a small office and gestured for me to sit in a plastic chair across from his desk. "I want to make sure you understand the situation," he said, turning his computer monitor so I could see the screen. "This is the vehicle registration from the DMV database." I leaned forward, squinting at the official document displayed on the screen. There it was, in black and white, a 2021 Toyota Camry silver VIN number matching the one I'd memorized, and under registered owners were 2 names, Emily Jane Parker and Robert James Parker. "When you purchased this vehicle 5 years ago," Martinez explained, his voice gentle but factual, "your father co-signed the loan. That made him a legal co-owner, not just a guarantor. Do you remember signing any paperwork that would have indicated this?" I tried to think back to that day at the dealership. I'd been so excited, so proud of myself for finally having enough saved for a down payment. My father had insisted on coming with me, said he wanted to make sure I got a fair deal. The finance manager had pushed a stack of documents across the desk, and I'd signed where the little yellow arrows pointed. My father had signed too, right next to my signature on several pages. I'd assumed he was just guaranteeing the loan, being helpful like he'd promised. "I thought he was just co-signing," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "He said he was helping me qualify for better interest rates." Martinez nodded slowly. "That may have been part of it, but the legal effect is the same. As co-owner, he has equal rights to the vehicle, which means if he authorized your sister to use it, that's not theft in the eyes of the law. This becomes a civil matter, a family dispute over shared property." "But I made every payment," I said, hearing the desperation creeping into my voice. "Every single month for 5 years. $487 automatically deducted from my checking account. I have bank statements proving it." "I believe you," Martinez said. "But legally that doesn't change the ownership status. You'd need to take this to civil court if you want to challenge his right to control the vehicle. I'm sorry, Miss Parker, there's nothing we can do from a criminal law perspective." The ride back to my apartment was silent. Martinez dropped me off with his card and a sympathetic look that somehow made everything worse. I climbed the stairs to my second-floor unit, my legs feeling like lead. All I wanted was to collapse on my couch and process what had just happened. But when I reached my door, I found someone waiting for me. He was standing in the hallway, a man in his 50s wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His briefcase was polished leather. His watch was gold, and his expression was professionally neutral in a way that immediately put me on edge. "Miss Parker, Emily Parker." He extended his hand. "My name is Donald Chen. I'm the attorney representing your father, Robert Parker. Do you have a moment to speak?" I didn't want to let him into my apartment, but he was already moving toward my door as I unlocked it, as if my agreement was assumed. Inside, he sat at my small kitchen table without being invited and pulled a folder from his briefcase. "Your father asked me to clarify the situation regarding the vehicle," he began, his tone making it clear he considered this a minor inconvenience rather than a serious matter. "There seems to be some confusion about ownership. Mr. Parker has graciously allowed you to use his vehicle for the past 5 years, and now he's decided that your sister Sophie needs it more urgently. She's starting a new position and requires reliable transportation." "His vehicle?" I said, still standing in my own kitchen. "I bought that car. I made every payment." "With money from a loan he co-signed using his credit and financial standing," Donald said smoothly. "Legally speaking, you've been operating a vehicle that your father owns. He's been more than generous in allowing you this arrangement, but circumstances have changed." He slid a document across my table. Even from where I stood, I could see the header, "Vehicle Use Agreement." "This is a simple acknowledgement that you understand the vehicle belongs to your father and that you've been using it with his permission, which he's now choosing to extend to your sister instead. If you'll just sign here, we can avoid any unfortunate misunderstandings or legal complications." I picked up the document and scanned it. The language was dense, full of legal jargon, but the meaning was clear. By signing, I would be acknowledging that I'd never owned the car, that everything I'd believed for 5 years was a lie. "And if I don't sign?" I asked. Donald's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then this becomes complicated, Miss Parker. Your father is a respected businessman with significant standing in this community. Making false accusations of theft, causing legal trouble over a family matter, these things could be seen as defamatory. They could impact your father's reputation and business relationships. I'm sure you wouldn't want that kind of conflict." The threat was barely veiled. Sign this and stay quiet, or face consequences I couldn't begin to imagine. He stood buttoning his suit jacket. "I'll leave this with you to review, but I'd encourage you to sign it and return it within 24 hours. It would be better for everyone if we resolve this quietly." After he left, I sat at my kitchen table as darkness fell outside my windows. I didn't turn on the lights. Instead, I opened my laptop and started searching through my email, my documents folder, my bank statements. The car loan agreement took me 20 minutes to find, buried in a subfolder from 5 years ago. I read through it carefully this time, seeing the words I'd glossed over in my excitement: co-borrower and joint ownership and equal rights. Then I pulled up my nursing school graduation gift from 7 years ago, the laptop my father had bought me when I finished my degree. I'd saved the receipt in my files because I was meticulous about that sort of thing. But now I noticed what I'd never paid attention to before the purchase was made in my father's name. The warranty was registered to him. Technically, this laptop I was using right now wasn't mine either. I searched for the apartment lease I'd signed when I moved into this place 4 years ago. My father had helped with the security deposit because I'd been short by $800. But when I found the deposit receipt, I saw his name listed as co-payer. Did that give him some legal claim to my apartment too? A pattern was emerging from the documents scattered across my screen. A pattern I'd been too trusting, too grateful, too naive to see before. Every time my father had helped me, every gesture of support, every moment when I'd felt grateful for his generosity, there had been paperwork. Paperwork that gave him control. Paperwork that kept me dependent while believing I was independent. My phone buzzed with a text message, startling me in the darkness. It was from Officer Martinez. "Ran your father's name through the system. This isn't the first complaint we've received about Robert Parker. Call me tomorrow." I stared at the message, my hands beginning to shake again. Not the first complaint. What did that mean? What else had my father done? I couldn't sleep that night. Officer Martinez's text kept replaying in my mind, but more than that, I kept thinking about patterns. How long had this been going on? How many years had I been blind to what was right in front of me? I got up around 3 in the morning and went to my closet, pulling down the cardboard box I'd shoved on the top shelf 3 years ago. My mother's things. the few items my father had deemed appropriate to give me after she died. I sat on my bedroom floor and opened it, sifting through the contents I'd been too heartbroken to examine closely before. A silk scarf that still smelled faintly of her perfume. Her wedding ring, which had always seemed too loose on her thin finger. A paperback romance novel with the corner of page 247 folded down, and at the bottom a small stack of photographs held together with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age. I went through them one by one. Mom and Dad on their wedding day, both looking impossibly young. Sophie as a baby, red-faced and screaming in her christening gown. A family vacation to the beach where I must have been about 10, standing apart from everyone else, my arms crossed over my chest. And then I found it a photo I'd never seen before, or at least didn't remember seeing. I was 12 in the picture, gangly and awkward, in that terrible stage between child and teenager. Sophie stood next to me, only 8 years old, both of us wearing matching floral dresses with puffy sleeves that I now recognized as handmade. Mom had sewn them. I could remember her at the kitchen table with her old Singer machine, the one that made a rhythmic thumping sound as the needle went up and down. We were standing in front of our childhood home, the blue house on Maple Street with the white shutters that always needed painting. I turned the photo over and my breath caught. My mother's handwriting, that careful script she'd learned in Catholic school, was inscribed on the back, "For my firstborn, May 1998. But below that, in smaller letters that looked like she'd pressed harder with the pen, digging into the paper, "Never let them silence you. You are stronger than you know. When the time comes, remember the truth is in the garden." My hands started shaking. I read the words again, then again. Never let them silence you. Had my mother known even back then? Had she seen what was happening to me, the way I was being trained to be invisible, to accept less, to always put everyone else first? The memories came flooding back, sharp and painful as broken glass. I was 7 years old at my elementary school winter concert. I'd practiced my solo for weeks, the little song about snowflakes falling. I could see myself on that stage in my red velvet dress, searching the audience for my parents' faces. They were there in the back row, but Dad was bent over Sophie, who was crying about something, probably bored or tired, and Mom was trying to soothe her while glancing apologetically at the stage. I sang my part perfectly, hitting every note, but when the concert ended and families gathered in the hallway, Dad's only words were, "We need to leave. Sophie's having a meltdown." No good job, no we're proud of you. Just irritation that a 3-year-old hadn't been able to sit quietly through her older sister's moment. And that became the pattern. When I brought home a report card with straight A's in 5th grade, the family dinner conversation revolved around Sophie finally learning to tie her shoes without help. When I made the volleyball team in 8th grade, Mom and Dad couldn't come to my games because Sophie had dance recitals every Saturday. When I got into nursing school with a partial scholarship, Dad's response was to remind me I'd need to take out loans for the rest, while he was already setting aside money for Sophie's college fund, even though she was still in middle school and showing no particular academic promise. By the time I was 15, I had a part-time job at a coffee shop working weekends to help pay for my school clothes and supplies. Sophie at 11 received a $50 weekly allowance for doing essentially nothing. When I asked why the difference was so stark, Dad said I was building character and learning the value of hard work. What I was really learning was that my needs didn't matter, that I was expected to be self-sufficient while Sophie was coddled and protected. The message had been so clear, so consistent, that I'd internalized it completely. My role in this family was to be responsible, capable, and invisible. Sophie's role was to be cherished, celebrated, protected from anything difficult or uncomfortable. I was the workhorse. She was the show pony. And then 3 years ago, everything got worse. The phone call came at 2 in the morning. Dad's voice tight and strange. "Your mother had an accident. She fell down the stairs. She's gone, Emily. She's gone." I'd thrown on clothes and driven to the hospital in a fog of disbelief. But by the time I arrived, they'd already taken her body away. Dad was in the waiting room with Sophie, who was sobbing dramatically while he held her. When I asked to see Mom to say goodbye, Dad shook his head firmly. "It's too late. The hospital already processed everything. Your mother wanted to be cremated immediately. No service, no fuss. You know how she hated being the center of attention. But that wasn't true. Mom had loved gatherings, loved celebrating life's moments. She would have wanted a funeral, wouldn't she? Yet, I was too numb with grief to question it, too trained to accept what I was told without argument. There was no wake, no service, no gathering of friends and family. Dad said they'd scattered her ashes at sea in a private ceremony, just him and Sophie. I wasn't invited. In the months that followed, whenever I tried to talk about Mom, to share memories or process my grief, Dad would cut me off. Stop living in the past, Emily. Your mother wouldn't want you dwelling on this. As if my grief was an inconvenience, something inappropriate that needed to be shut down. Now sitting on my bedroom floor at 3 a.m, holding this photograph with my mother's hidden message, I felt something shift inside me. Not breaking, implied weakness damage. This was different. This was clarity, cold and sharp as a blade. I clutched the photograph to my chest and let myself feel everything I'd been suppressing for decades. The rage, the hurt, the betrayal. And underneath it all, a determination that felt like steel forming in my spine. My mother had tried to warn me. She'd left me a message literally written in her own hand: never let them silence you. I was done being silent. I spent the rest of that morning clutching the photograph, reading my mother's message over and over until the words were burned into my brain. By noon, I'd made a decision. I needed answers, and I was going to get them directly from my father. I got dressed, put the photograph carefully in my purse, and drove my rental car to the house where I grew up. The blue house on Maple Street looked exactly the same as it always had, though I noticed the white shutters had finally been repainted. I parked on the street and walked up the driveway, my heart pounding. I hadn't called ahead. I wanted the element of surprise. But when I reached the front door and rang the bell, what greeted me was something else entirely. My father opened the door with a look of grim expectation, as if he'd been waiting for me. "Emily, come in. We're in the living room." Not the kitchen where we usually gathered, but the formal living room with the cream-colored furniture and oriental rug that we were never allowed to walk on with shoes as children. My stomach dropped. This was planned. I followed him down the hallway and stopped in the doorway. My father took his seat in the leather wingback chair that had always been his throne. Sophie sat on the sofa, her hands twisted in her lap, not meeting my eyes. And there, sitting in the other armchair with a neat stack of papers on the coffee table in front of him, was Donald Chen, the lawyer who'd visited my apartment. "Please sit down," my father said, gesturing to a straight-backed chair that had been positioned directly across from all three of them. It was like being called to the principal's office, except I was 34 years old, and this was supposed to be my family. I remained standing. "What is this?" "We need to discuss your recent behavior." My father said, his voice so calm it made my skin crawl. "Calling the police and filing a false report, accusing your own father of theft. This is exactly the kind of drama your mother always worried about with you." The mention of my mother sent a jolt of anger through me. "Drama. You gave away my car without asking me. You had no right." "I had every right," he replied, his tone taking on that patient, condescending quality I'd heard my entire life when he thought I was being unreasonable. "I co-signed that loan because your credit score wasn't sufficient. I've been covering the insurance premiums for years without asking you for reimbursement. That vehicle represents a significant financial investment on my part, and now your sister needs it more than you do." That was a lie. I'd paid my own insurance from the beginning, but before I could say so, Sophie finally spoke up, her voice small and apologetic. I'm really sorry about all this. I didn't mean to cause problems between you and Dad. I just really needed a car, and mine completely died, and I have this new job opportunity." "Sophie is trying to turn her life around," my father interrupted, "and instead of supporting your sister, you're creating conflict and making wild accusations. Donald is here because we're concerned about your state of mind." I looked at the lawyer, who gave me a thin smile. "Your father is worried that the stress of your job may be affecting your judgment, Miss Parker." These accusations of theft, the hostility toward family members trying to help you, these are concerning patterns of behavior." Then I noticed it. My father's phone on the side table propped up at an angle, the screen showing a red recording indicator. He was filming this entire conversation, creating a record. I could already imagine how it would look, me standing while they sat calmly, my voice rising while they remained reasonable, every word I said being captured and potentially used against me later. "You're recording this," I said flatly. "For everyone's protection," Donald said smoothly. "Given the allegations you've made, your father felt it prudent to document this conversation." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the photograph on the coffee table and demand they explain my mother's cryptic message. But something stopped me. They were too prepared, too coordinated. Whatever I said right now would be twisted and used as evidence of my instability. "I'm leaving," I said, turning toward the door. "Emily, wait." Sophie was suddenly on her feet, following me into the hallway. Behind us, I could hear my father saying something to Donald, but Sophie had grabbed my arm, pulling me further from the living room doorway, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "You think this is about a car?" Her eyes were wide, darting back toward the living room. "Emily, you have no idea what Dad's really done. If you keep pushing, if you keep digging into things—" "Sophie, we're not finished here." My father's voice cut through the hallway like a whip. Sophie's face went pale. Whatever she'd been about to say died on her lips. The fear in her eyes was genuine and deep, the kind of fear that comes from knowing exactly what someone is capable of. "Just let it go," she whispered, releasing my arm. "Please, for both our sakes." Then she turned and walked back to the living room, leaving me standing alone in the hallway of my childhood home, feeling more isolated than I'd ever felt in my life. I drove back to my apartment in a daze, my mind spinning. Sophie's fear had been real. Whatever was happening here was bigger than a stolen car, bigger than a lifetime of favoritism. My father had been prepared for my confrontation, had staged it like a performance with witnesses and recording devices. He was building a narrative where I was the unstable one, the troublemaker, the daughter who couldn't accept her family's generosity. That evening, as I sat in my apartment trying to make sense of everything, my laptop chimed with an incoming email. The sender was a blank address, just a string of random numbers and letters. No subject line. I hesitated before opening it, my cursor hovering over the delete button. But something made me click. The message contained a single sentence. "Your mother didn't fall. Check the accident report, if you can find it." My blood went cold. I stared at the screen, reading those words again and again. Your mother didn't fall. Someone out there knew something about my mother's death. Someone who was too afraid to identify themselves but desperate enough to reach out anyway. I looked at the photograph still sitting on my coffee table, my mother's handwriting visible on the back. "Never let them silence you. The truth is in the garden." What truth? What had my mother known, and who had just sent me this message? The anonymous email haunted me for 2 days. I tried responding to it, but my messages bounced back as undeliverable. I searched for accident reports from 3 years ago, but the hospital records I could access showed nothing unusual, just a standard fall injuries consistent with tumbling downstairs, time of death recorded as 11:42 p.m. But something about that anonymous message felt urgent, like someone was trying to warn me before it was too late. Then Officer Martinez called. "Miss Parker, I need you to come down to the impound lot on South Dawson Street. There's been a development with your vehicle." His voice was tight, professional, in a way that made my stomach clench. The impound lot was a sprawling chain-link enclosure filled with damaged cars, abandoned vehicles, and evidence from crime scenes. Martinez met me at the gate, his expression grim. He led me through rows of twisted metal and shattered glass until we reached a vehicle I barely recognized. My Camry looked like it had been in a war. The entire front end was crumpled against what must have been an immovable object, the hood accordion folded, both airbags deployed, and hanging limply from the steering wheel and dashboard. The windshield was a spider web of cracks radiating out from a central impact point. I stopped walking, my hand going to my mouth. "Sophie crashed it 3 nights ago," Martinez said. 2 a.m. blood alcohol level .12, nearly 50 miles over the speed limit. She hit a concrete barrier outside a warehouse in the industrial district. Walked away with minor cuts, which frankly is a miracle. I couldn't speak. The car I'd worked so hard for, that I'd cared for meticulously for 5 years, was destroyed. But Martinez wasn't finished. When we processed the vehicle for the DUI investigation, we found something interesting. He walked to the back of the car and popped the trunk, which opened with a groan of protesting metal. "Look here." He pointed to the trunk floor. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then he pulled up what should have been the carpet lining, revealing a false bottom, a professional modification with a hidden compartment about 6 inches deep running the length of the trunk. "This is custom work," Martinez explained. "High-grade materials expertly installed, the kind of modification we typically see in smuggling operations." He pulled out an evidence bag containing what looked like receipts. "We also found these tucked in the glove compartment. Border crossing receipts from 3 different entry points into Canada over the past 2 months. Do you remember making trips to Canada?" I shook my head, my mind racing. "No, I've never driven this car across any border." "That's what I thought." He showed me the dates on the receipts. August 7th, September 15th, October 3rd. "Do these dates mean anything to you?" I pulled out my phone and checked my calendar, scrolling back through the past months. August 7th, my car was in the shop. At least that's what my father told me. He said it needed transmission work and gave me his old sedan to use for a week. I checked the other dates. September 15th, same thing. He said there was a recall on the brake system. And October 3rd, he told me the air conditioning compressor needed replacement. Martinez nodded slowly, as if I'd just confirmed something he already suspected. "Your car was never in any shop, Miss Parker. Your father was using it to transport something across the Canadian border. The drug dogs alerted on the vehicle, but we didn't find any narcotics. What we did find was residue traces of packaging materials and chemical signatures consistent with transported goods." The implications crashed over me like a wave. My father had been using my car, registered in my name, to smuggle something across international borders, and I'd been completely oblivious. "There's more," Martinez said, his voice gentler now. "The insurance company has been in contact with us. Because the vehicle was being used for illegal purposes, they're denying the claim. You're listed as co-owner, which means you could be held liable for the damages." "How much?" My voice sounded distant, not like my own. $18,000. The remaining loan balance plus the cost of the concrete barrier, which belongs to a commercial property. They're already filing suit." He paused. "I received a call this morning from your father's attorney. He said Mr. Parker is willing to take care of all the financial obligations if you sign some documents and agree not to discuss this matter with law enforcement." I felt sick. It was extortion disguised as help. Sign away my rights, stay silent about whatever my father was involved in, or be crushed under a mountain of debt I couldn't possibly afford. "There's something else you need to see." Martinez pulled out another evidence bag, this one containing a forensics report. "We lifted fingerprints from the false bottom of the trunk. They don't match yours, your sister's, or your father's. They belong to a man named Vincent Torres. Does that name mean anything to you?" I shook my head. Martinez pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph. A man in his 50s, hard-faced with cold eyes and a scar running along his jawline. "Vincent Torres runs a smuggling operation out of Vancouver. Drugs, weapons, money laundering, you name it, he's been suspected of it. But he's never been successfully prosecuted because he's smart and he has powerful connections. We've been trying to build a case against him for years." He swiped to another screen, showing me a business registration document. "Your father's company, Parker Import-Export Consulting, has been under federal investigation for the past 18 months. Suspicious transaction patterns, unexplained cash deposits, connections to known criminal organizations. But we've never had concrete evidence linking him directly to Torres's operation." He looked at me meaningfully. "Until potentially now." This car registered in your name, modified for smuggling with Torres's fingerprints all over it, used for multiple border crossings. This could be the break we've been waiting for." My legs felt weak. I leaned against a nearby car for support. My father wasn't just controlling and manipulative. He was a criminal. And he'd been using me, my car, my name to facilitate his illegal operations. Martinez's next question cut through my shock like a knife. "Miss Parker, I need to ask you something important. In the past 3 years since your mother's death, has your father had any sudden changes in wealth, lifestyle, or behavior?" I thought about the repainted shutters on the house, the new luxury sedan he'd bought last year, the vacation property in Arizona Sophie had mentioned. I thought about how he'd seemed almost relieved after Mom died, how quickly he'd moved on, how he'd shut down any conversation about her. And I thought about that anonymous email, "Your mother didn't fall." "Yes," I whispered. "Everything changed after my mother died." The letters started arriving 3 days after I saw the destroyed Camry. I came home from my shift to find the first one taped to my apartment door, a formal demand from Cascadia Property Management for $8,000 in damages to their concrete barrier. The next morning brought a certified letter from my insurance company denying the claim and demanding $10,000 for what they termed fraudulent use of policy coverage for illegal activities. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by these documents, my hands shaking as I calculated numbers that didn't add up to anything but ruin. I had exactly $3,216 in my checking account, the result of 2 years of careful saving of bringing lunch from home instead of buying it, of choosing Netflix over going out with friends. I had credit cards with a combined limit of $15,000, but the interest rates were 22%. If I maxed them out to pay these debts, I'd be trapped in a cycle of minimum payments for years, watching interest compound while I struggled to stay afloat. My only real asset was my investment account, the one I'd been building since I started working as a nurse. $12,300. It was supposed to be my down payment fund, my escape route, my proof that I could build something of my own. Every month I'd transferred whatever I could spare, sometimes just $50, sometimes $200 if I picked up extra shifts. I'd watched that number grow with a pride I'd never felt about anything else in my life. It represented a future where I owned something outright, where no one could take it away from me. Now I was going to have to liquidate it all, and it still wouldn't be enough. Donald Chen had called twice, his voicemail messages crisp and professional. Mr. Parker was prepared to resolve all financial obligations related to the vehicle incident, but only if I signed the documents he'd presented and agreed to cease any discussions with law enforcement regarding family business matters. The unspoken threat was crystal clear: cooperate and be rescued, or refuse and drown. But the financial pressure wasn't even the worst part. 4 days after the letters arrived, my supervisor, Karen Chen, called me into her office. She was a stern woman in her 50s who'd always been fair with me, even supportive when I'd applied for the critical care rotation. Now her face was troubled as she gestured for me to close the door. "Emily, I need to talk to you about some concerns that have been brought to my attention," she began, not quite meeting my eyes. "There have been rumors circulating about legal troubles you're involved in, something about smuggling operations." My stomach dropped. I'm not involved in anything illegal. My father used my car without my knowledge." "I'm not accusing you of anything," she interrupted gently. "But the hospital board has expressed concern about potential liability issues. Until this situation is resolved, I'm going to need to move you out of critical care and into administrative duties. It's temporary, just until everything gets cleared up. The critical care rotation. I'd worked for 3 years to earn that position, had proven myself capable of handling the most challenging patients, the most high-stakes situations. And now it was being taken away because of rumors, because someone had whispered the right words to the right people on the hospital board. Someone with connections. Someone like my father. "I understand," I said quietly, because what else could I say? Walking through the hospital corridors over the next few days became an exercise in humiliation. Colleagues I'd worked alongside for years suddenly found reasons to avoid me. "Jennifer," A nurse I'd considered a genuine friend actually crossed to the other side of the hallway when she saw me approaching, pretending to be very interested in her phone. In the break room, conversations would stop when I entered, and people would drift away with mumbled excuses. The isolation was suffocating, pressing down on me from all sides. My family had turned against me. My finances were collapsing. My career was under threat, and I was completely, utterly alone. I came home on a Friday evening exhausted from a day of filing paperwork and answering phones, jobs I'd done as a nursing student, jobs I'd thought I'd moved beyond. There was a manila envelope wedged into my apartment door, thick and slightly bent from being forced into the narrow gap. No postage, no return address, just my name written in unfamiliar handwriting across the front. Inside, I found a business card, Margaret Chen, attorney at law, specializing in estate planning and family law. The cardstock was expensive, the lettering embossed. But it was the other item in the envelope that made my breath catch a photocopied page, clearly part of a larger document with my grandmother's signature at the bottom. Catherine Marie Parker, dated April 2017, less than a year before she died. The photocopy was partial cut off at the edges, but I could read enough to make my heart race. My name appeared twice in the visible text and Sophie's name once, and there in the middle of a paragraph were the words "equal distribution to both granddaughters," followed by what looked like a dollar amount, though the numbers were cut off by the edge of the copy. I'd been told my grandmother left almost nothing. Just some personal effects, a few pieces of furniture that my father had distributed as he saw fit. I'd received a box of photographs and her wedding ring. That was it. But this document suggested something else entirely, that there had been money, possibly a substantial amount, that was supposed to be divided equally between Sophie and me. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on Margaret Chen's business card. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered, clear and businesslike. "Margaret Chen speaking? This is Emily Parker. I just found your card and I've been waiting for you to call Emily." Her voice softened immediately, taking on an urgency that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Your grandmother wanted me to help you, but I couldn't reach out directly without putting us both at risk. We need to meet and soon, but not anywhere your father might find out about. Do you know the coffee shop on Pike Street, the one near the university, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m.? Come alone and make sure you're not followed." The line went dead before I could ask any of the 1,000 questions flooding my mind. I barely slept that night. By 7 the next morning, I was already on the road driving south toward Tacoma in my rental car. Margaret Chen had been specific about the location, a small coffee shop called the Brew House tucked into a quiet neighborhood far from anywhere my father would have reason to be. I arrived 20 minutes early and sat in my car watching the street, making sure no one had followed me. The paranoia felt absurd and justified in equal measure. Margaret arrived exactly at 8, stepping out of a silver Mercedes with the kind of confident grace that came from decades of courtroom experience. She was in her early 60s with short silver hair, sharp eyes behind stylish glasses, and a leather portfolio tucked under her arm that looked like it had seen years of use. She spotted me through the coffee shop window and gave a small nod of recognition before ordering something at the counter and joining me at the corner table. I'd chosen one with a view of both entrances. "Thank you for coming," she said, settling into her chair and placing the portfolio on the table between us. "I know this must be frightening and confusing. Let me start by explaining who I am and why I've been waiting to contact you." She took a sip of her coffee as if gathering her thoughts. "I was your grandmother Catherine's estate attorney for 20 years. I handled all of her legal affairs, including her will and the trust she established for you and your sister." My throat felt tight. "My father said there wasn't much, just some personal items." Margaret's expression hardened. "Your father lied to you, Emily. When your grandmother died in March 2017, she left a trust fund of $850,000. The terms were clear. The money was to be divided equally between you and Sophie when you each turned 30. You turned 30 4 years ago. You should have received $425,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $425,000. I thought of every double shift I'd worked, every time I'd eaten ramen for dinner to save money, every dream I'd deferred because I couldn't afford it. All while nearly $500,000 that belonged to me sat somewhere I couldn't access. Margaret opened her portfolio and pulled out a document, sliding it across the table. "This is your grandmother's original will, properly executed, notarized, and witnessed. You can see the provisions clearly stated here." I looked down at the yellowed paper, seeing my grandmother's signature at the bottom, bold and clear. The language was formal and legal, but I could pick out the important parts: equal distribution, no conditions, funds to be released at age 30. Then why didn't I get it? My voice sounded strangled. Margaret pulled out another document, this one more recent. 6 months after your grandmother died, this codicil was filed with the probate court. It's allegedly signed by your mother, Mary Parker, granting your father full control of your portion as trustee until such time as you demonstrate financial responsibility. Note that there are no criteria defined for what that means. It's essentially giving him indefinite control. I stared at the document, seeing my mother's signature at the bottom. It looked right, the looping M, the way she always dotted her I's. But when Margaret pointed to certain details, I started to see the differences. The pressure of the pen was uneven in places. One letter slanted the wrong direction. It was close, but not quite perfect. "I believe your father forged this," Margaret said quietly. "After Catherine died, he created this codicil to maintain control over your inheritance. I tried to contest it at the time, tried to reach you. I sent 3 certified letters to your address, Emily. All 3 were returned, marked refused delivery." "I never got any letters," I said immediately. "I know that now. I suspect your father intercepted them, refused delivery on your behalf. Without your mother alive to verify her signature and without you responding to my attempts to contact you, there was nothing I could do legally. The codicil stood." She pulled out bank statements next, spreading them across the table. They showed withdrawals from the trust account in my name, thousands of dollars at a time. Your grandmother died in March 2017. The fraudulent codicil was filed in September 2017. Your mother died in March 2022. She looked at me meaningfully. You turned 34 in March 2022. Do you see the pattern? I stared at the dates, my mind putting together what she was suggesting. I could have challenged it. Exactly. After 5 years, you could have legally demanded an audit of how your inheritance was being managed. You could have taken him to court, questioned the validity of the codicil, demanded your mother verify that signature. But your mother died right before you would have had that legal standing. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, the walls too close. Margaret continued, her voice gentle but relentless. Over 5 years, your father withdrew the entire $425,000 supposedly for your benefit. I have documentation showing he used it to expand his import business, purchase a vacation property in Arizona, and provide funding for Sophie's living expenses. You never saw a single penny of it. Every time I'd struggled to make rent. Every time I'd worked until my feet bled in those hospital clogs. Every time I'd chosen paying bills over having a life. I'd had nearly $500,000 that was legally mine, and my father had been spending it while watching me suffer. Margaret hesitated, then picked up her phone. There's something else you need to hear. Your grandmother recorded this in October 2016, about 6 months before she died. She gave it to me with instructions to share it with you if certain things happened. She pressed play, and suddenly my grandmother's voice filled the space between us, shakier than I remembered, but unmistakably hers. Margaret, if you're playing this for Emily, it means I'm gone. And Mary is too. If anything happens to Mary before that money goes to Emily, Robert will be behind it. I know my son-in-law. He's been siphoning money from his business partners for years, and when Mary found out, he scared her. She came to me crying, saying she didn't know how to protect the girls. Margaret, if I die and then Mary dies, you make sure Emily knows. You make sure she knows to look at what really happened the night Mary fell. The recording ended. I was crying, tears streaming down my face without me even realizing it had started. My grandmother had known. She'd known my father was dangerous, that my mother was in trouble, that something terrible was coming. "You think my father killed my mother?" The words came out as barely a whisper. Margaret met my eyes steadily, her expression grave and certain. "I think your mother knew something that made her dangerous to him. And I think 3 years ago she was going to tell someone." I sat in that coffee shop for another hour after Margaret played my grandmother's recording, trying to process what I'd just learned. But my mind kept circling back to one night, one phone call, one moment that had shattered my world 3 years ago. I closed my eyes and forced myself to remember what I'd been trying so hard to forget. It was March 15th, 2022. I was working a night shift in the cardiac unit, about to finish my rounds at 11. My phone rang, my father's name on the screen, and something in my gut clenched even before I answered. He never called me at work. His voice when I picked up was strange, too controlled, each word carefully measured, like he was reading from a script. "Emily, there's been an accident. Your mother fell down the stairs. The ambulance is here now." I remember my hands going numb, the phone nearly slipping from my grip. "Is she okay? Let me talk to her." "She's unconscious. They're working on her right now. You should come to the house." But that didn't make sense. I was a nurse. I knew emergency protocols. If someone fell down the stairs, paramedics would stabilize them on scene, secure the spine, assess for internal injuries. They wouldn't be working on her at the house, they'd already be transporting her to the nearest emergency room. I should have questioned it then, should have asked which hospital, should have insisted on speaking to the paramedics. Instead, I just said I was coming and hung up. By the time I got to Seattle Memorial's emergency department 30 minutes later, my mother was already dead. My father was in the family waiting room with Sophie, who was crying hysterically. His face was composed, somber, appropriate. But his story had changed. Now it wasn't unconscious anymore. Now it was, she died instantly from the head trauma. When I asked why they'd brought her here instead of to the closer hospital, he said the paramedics made that decision, not him, Dr. Reeves, the attending physician, had seemed uncomfortable when I asked questions about what happened. He filled out the death certificate quickly, his pen moving fast across the form, barely looking at me when I asked if an autopsy would be performed. In cases of accidental death with a clear cause and no suspicious circumstances, it's not typically required, he'd said, already turning to leave. Your father has requested cremation as soon as possible. It's what your mother wanted. Now, sitting across from Margaret, I realized how many red flags I'd missed, because I was drowning in grief and shock. There's more, Margaret said softly, pulling me back to the present. She reached into her portfolio and withdrew a key. Your grandmother gave me access to her safety deposit box before she died. She added items to it after Mary's death. I think you need to see what's inside. 2 hours later, we were at a bank in Tacoma, and Margaret was using the key to open a long metal box. Inside were legal documents, bonds, and at the very bottom, an old smartphone in a cracked pink case that I recognized immediately. It had been my mother's, the one she'd used before upgrading to a newer model. Your grandmother went to the house while your father was at the funeral home, Margaret explained. She took this from Mary's nightstand. She told me she had a feeling it might contain something important. My hands shook as I plugged the dead phone into a charger Margaret had brought. We waited in silence for it to power on. When the lock screen finally appeared, I tried several combinations before landing on the right one. Chen Zhou 4112, my mother's maiden name followed by my birthday. The phone opened to reveal a home screen full of apps. I went straight to the voice memos, my heart pounding. There were dozens of recordings, most from years ago, shopping lists, reminders, a recording of Sophie's middle school choir concert. But the last one was dated March 15, 2022, time-stamped at 8:47 p.m. I pressed play with trembling fingers. My mother's voice filled the quiet bank vault, shaking with fear. I can't do this anymore. Robert found out I went to the FBI about his business. He knows I copied files from his office. He's downstairs right now, and I can hear him on the phone with someone, and baby. I'm scared. If something happens to me tonight, If there's an accident, you need to know that it wasn't an accident. Emily, you need to know your father is not who you think he is. The money, the business, all of it is. There was a sudden crash, the sound of the phone hitting something hard, then muffled voices and footsteps. The recording continued for another 30 seconds, capturing sounds I couldn't quite make out before it cut off completely. I played it again, then again. Each time that crash and my mother's unfinished sentence hit me like a fist to the chest. Margaret drove me straight to the police station. Officer Martinez took one look at my face and brought us into a conference room, then called in Detective Sarah Chen, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I played the recording for them, watched their expressions shift from curiosity to grim understanding. Detective Chen pulled up the original incident report from 3 years ago on her computer. "This is thin," she muttered, scrolling through. 2 pages filed by Robert Parker as the sole witness. He claims he found Mary at the bottom of the stairs around 11 p.m., already deceased, and immediately called 911. "Can we hear the 911 call?" I asked. She pulled up the audio file and played it. My father's voice came through the speakers, and I felt my skin crawl at how calm he sounded. "My wife fell down the stairs. She's not breathing. No, I don't know CPR. Yes, she's at the bottom of the stairs. How long ago, I'm not sure. I just found her." Detective Chen paused the recording. "The timestamp on this call is 11:47 p.m., but your mother's voice memo cuts off at 8:53 p.m. That's almost a 3-hour gap." She looked at me, then at Margaret. "Where was your mother's body during those 3 hours? What was Robert doing, and why didn't he call for help immediately if he found her injured?" The detective made notes on her pad, her pen moving quickly. "We're going to need to pull medical examiner reports, autopsy records, if any exist, cremation paperwork. We need to establish whether the injuries were consistent with a simple fall or if there's evidence of assault." She closed her notepad and looked directly at me, her expression serious. "Miss Parker, I'm going to be honest with you. We're looking at this as a potential homicide now. But I need you to understand something. If we move forward with this investigation, your father will know. And if he's capable of what we think he is, you could be in danger." Detective Chen's warning echoed in my mind for days, but instead of making me afraid, it crystallized something inside me. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to build a case so airtight that my father would have nowhere left to run. But to do that, I needed to become someone different, someone methodical, strategic, impossible to rattle. I started by transforming my apartment into something between a war room and an evidence vault. I bought a fireproof safe from a home security store and bolted it to the floor of my closet. Every original document went inside my grandmother's will, the codicil with the forged signature bank statements, showing the stolen inheritance, my mother's phone with its devastating voice memo. I purchased a voice-activated recorder, small enough to fit in my pocket, and started carrying it everywhere. Margaret helped me set up a cloud backup system that automatically uploaded copies of everything to her secure server, ensuring that even if something happened to me, the evidence would survive. On my living room wall, I created a timeline using colored sticky notes and string, mapping out every significant event over the past 8 years. My grandmother's death in March 2017. The fraudulent codicil filed 6 months later. Every withdrawal my father made from my inheritance. The dates my car had supposedly been in the shop that corresponded with Canadian border crossings. My mother's death in March 2022, right when I would have had legal standing to challenge the trust. Seeing it all laid out visually made the pattern impossible to deny. This wasn't random misfortune. This was orchestrated theft and possibly murder. I learned to screenshot every text message the moment it arrived, saving them with timestamps in organized folders. Every email from my father or his lawyer got printed, dated, and filed. I started keeping a detailed journal of every interaction with my family, writing entries in the factual, clinical language I'd learned as a nurse. No emotions, no interpretations, just facts, time, date, who was present, what was said, how they responded. My years of charting patient symptoms had trained me for exactly this kind of meticulous documentation. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to change how I interacted with my father, how I presented myself to the world. Margaret suggested I practice, so I started standing in front of my bathroom mirror, having conversations with my own reflection. I practiced keeping my face neutral while imagining my father's most infuriating statements. I rehearsed keeping my voice steady and calm even when fury was boiling inside me. I learned the difference between reacting and responding, between letting emotion drive my words and choosing each syllable with purpose. Margaret taught me how to ask questions that sounded innocent, but were actually traps. Instead of accusing, I learned to inquire. Instead of confronting, I learned to request clarification. When my father sent a text saying I was being ungrateful and dramatic, I waited 6 hours before responding with a simple, "I understand you feel that way. Can we discuss this when you have time?" No defensiveness, no explanations, just calm acknowledgement that gave him nothing to use against me. Sophie called 3 times that week, crying about how cold I was being, how I was tearing the family apart. The old Emily would have tried to explain, would have defended herself, would have apologized just to keep the peace. The new Emily simply said, "I'm sorry you feel that way," and ended the call. Then I opened my journal and documented it. November 8th, 7th, 32 p.m. Sophie Parker called duration. 4 minutes claimed I was destroying family. I declined to engage. But there was still one piece of the puzzle I hadn't solved: my mother's cryptic message on the back of the photograph. "The truth is in the garden." I'd been thinking about those words constantly, and finally I decided to act on them. I checked my father's social media and saw he'd posted about a business trip to Portland. The house would be empty. I drove to Maple Street just after midnight, parking 2 blocks away and walking through the shadows. My old house key still worked. He'd never bothered to change the locks. I slipped inside and made my way through the dark house to the back door, stepping out into the garden that my mother had loved so much. It was overgrown now, neglected since her death. Weeds choked the flower beds and the lawn was patchy and wild. But there in the back corner was the peony bush my mother had tended obsessively, the one she'd spent hours pruning and fertilizing. I remembered her out here on weekend mornings, her hands in the soil, a peaceful expression on her face. I knelt beside the bush and started digging with the small garden trowel I'd brought. The earth was soft from recent rain. 2 feet down, my trowel hit something solid. I cleared away more soil until I could see it, a metal lockbox wrapped in waterproof tarp. My hands were shaking as I pulled it free and unwrapped the tarp. The box wasn't locked. Inside were 3 USB drives, each labeled with date ranges from 2019 through 2022. There was a stack of papers, scanned documents that looked like business ledgers, handwritten notes in my mother's writing, photographs of computer screens showing financial transactions. And at the bottom was a sealed envelope with my name written across it in my mother's handwriting. I opened the envelope carefully. The letter inside was 3 pages long, my mother's familiar script covering both sides of each sheet. "My dearest Emily," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and it probably wasn't an accident. I discovered something about your father's business that I can't stay silent about. He's been using the import company as a front to launder money for a man named Vincent Torres. I have proof copies of ledgers, transaction records, communication logs. I was going to take all of this to the FBI, but I'm terrified of what Robert might do if he finds out. So I'm hiding this evidence where I know you'll eventually look, because you're my brave girl. You're stronger than you know. Don't let him silence you the way he silenced me. Make him answer for everything." Tears streamed down my face as I read her words. She'd known she was in danger. She'd prepared for the worst. And she'd trusted that someday I would find this, would have the courage to use it. I was carefully placing everything back in the box when I heard the sound of a car engine idling on the street. I froze, my heart hammering. Through the bushes, I could see a dark sedan parked 3 houses down, headlights off, someone sitting in the driver's seat, watching. I grabbed the box and moved quickly back through the house, my pulse racing. As I reached my car 2 blocks away, my phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. I looked down at the screen and my blood ran cold. Stop digging or you'll end up like your mother. The threatening text message changed everything. Someone was watching me, tracking my movements, willing to intimidate me into silence. I forwarded the message to Detective Chen and Margaret immediately, then spent the rest of the night sitting in my locked apartment with every light on the metal lockbox from my mother's garden hidden in my safe. I barely slept, jumping at every sound in the hallway. 2 days later, a Facebook message appeared in my inbox from someone I'd never heard of. The profile picture showed a man in his early 30s with dark hair and tired eyes. The message was brief. I'm your sister's boyfriend. We need to talk about Robert Parker before someone else gets hurt. I know you've been asking questions. I have answers. The name on the profile was Ryan Torres. Torres. The same last name as Vincent Torres, the smuggler whose fingerprints had been found in my car. My first instinct was to delete it to assume this was another trap, but something about the phrasing "before someone else gets hurt" made me pause. I showed the message to Margaret, who advised me to meet him, but only in a very public place. That's how I found myself at a crowded cafe in Pike Place Market on a gray November afternoon, sitting at a corner table with a clear view of all the exits. Ryan arrived exactly on time, looking around nervously before spotting me. He was tall and lean, with shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well either. When he sat down across from me, his hands were shaking slightly as he wrapped them around his coffee cup. "Thank you for meeting me," he said quietly. "I know you have no reason to trust me, especially given my last name, but I need you to hear what I have to say." "You're related to Vincent Torres," I said flatly. It wasn't a question. "He's my uncle. My legal name is Ricky Torres, though I go by Ryan Parker publicly. Now I took Sophie's last name when we started dating to distance myself from my family." He took a breath, seeming to gather courage. "I started seeing your sister 18 months ago, and I need to be honest with you about how that happened. My uncle sent me to get close to your family. He wanted inside information on your father's operations, someone who could report back on Robert's plans and movements. But then I actually got to know Sophie, and I fell in love with her. Really in love. And the more I learned about what your father was doing to her, to you, to your whole family, the more I wanted to help her get out." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but all I saw was exhaustion and something that looked like genuine desperation. "Your father's operation is bigger than you know," Ryan continued. "Vincent's organization moves money from the Canadian drug trade back into the U.S. They need legitimate businesses to launder it through, and that's where your father comes in. Robert's import company provides the perfect cover reel shipments, mixed with fake invoices, inflated values, cash payments that look legitimate on paper. Your father takes 15% of everything that moves through his business. In the past 3 years alone, he's made over $2 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. $2 million on top of the $425,000 he'd stolen from my inheritance. Ryan pulled out his phone and swiped through photos. "I've been documenting everything. I've seen your father in his home office forging signatures on documents. I watched him practice your mother's handwriting over and over until he got it right. At the time, I didn't know what he was forging, but now that you've started asking questions, I realize it must have been that codicil to your grandmother's will." He showed me photo after photo Robert at his desk late at night, papers spread in front of him, his hand moving across a page in careful, deliberate strokes. In one image, I could see multiple sheets with my mother's name written repeatedly, each one slightly different, like he was perfecting her signature. "I went to the FBI 6 months ago," Ryan admitted. "I'm a confidential informant. They've been building the case against Vincent and everyone in his network, including your father. But federal investigations move slowly. They want everything perfect before they make arrests. When Sophie mentioned that you were digging into your mother's death, I realized something. The FBI just wants the money laundering conviction. They don't care about what happened to your mother. But you do. And I think you can do what the FBI can't. You can force your father's hand, make him panic, make him sloppy." "Why would you help me?" I asked, still wary. "What do you get out of this?" "Sophie," he said simply. "I want her free of him. I want her safe. And I know she'll never be either of those things as long as Robert has power over her. He pulled up an audio file on his phone. I need you to hear this. I recorded it about a month ago. Sophie had been drinking and everything just came pouring out. He pressed play, and my sister's voice filled the space between us, slurred and broken with crying. I can't do this anymore, Ryan. I can't pretend I don't know what Dad did. That night Mom fell, I was there. I was upstairs, I heard them arguing. I heard her say she was going to the FBI, that she had copies of everything. And then I heard the crash, and Dad called up to me and told me to go to my room and stay there, not to come out no matter what. He said if I told anyone what I heard, I'd be guilty too as an accessory. I was so scared. I'm still scared. The recording continued for another minute, Sophie's drunken confession rambling and repetitive, but the core truth was unmistakable. She'd been there. She'd heard the argument. She knew what our father had done, and she'd been living with that knowledge for 3 years, terrified into silence. My hands were shaking with rage, but Ryan leaned forward urgently. She's a victim too, Emily. I know you're angry, you have every right to be, but he's manipulated her since she was a child. He's kept her financially dependent, emotionally terrorized. She wants to tell the truth. She just doesn't know how to escape him. I closed my eyes, trying to control the storm of emotions inside me. When I opened them again, Ryan was watching me with something like hope in his expression. There's something else you need to know, he said. Your father told Sophie last week that they might need to relocate to the Arizona property soon. He said things are getting complicated in Seattle, that it might be time for a fresh start. Emily, I think he's preparing to run. If he gets to Mexico or somewhere without an extradition treaty, you'll never get justice for your mother. The urgency in his voice matched the fear suddenly gripping my chest. Everything I'd been building, the evidence, the case, the careful documentation, it would all mean nothing if my father disappeared before I could use it. How much time do we have? I asked. I don't know. Days, maybe. A week at most. Ryan's warning about my father planning to flee gave me a new sense of urgency. If I was going to stop him, I needed Sophie's testimony on record. I needed her to say out loud in her own words what she'd witnessed the night our mother died. But Sophie wouldn't talk to me willingly, not after weeks of cold distance between us. I needed to become someone she trusted again, at least long enough to get the truth. I crafted the text message, carefully reading it over 3 times before sending. I'm sorry I've been distant. I know I've been unfair to you. Can we meet for dinner? I miss my sister. It was exactly the kind of message the old Emily would have sent, apologetic, accommodating, taking responsibility for tension that wasn't her fault. I hated every word, but it worked. Sophie responded within minutes, eager and relieved. Yes, I've missed you so much. Let me pick the place. She chose Bella Vista, an upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Seattle, with private booths and dim lighting where conversations felt intimate and confidential. Perfect for what I needed. Ryan met me an hour before the dinner, bringing a small recording device that his FBI contact had provided. It looked like a decorative enamel pin, the kind you'd wear on a jacket lapel, but it contained a high-quality microphone that would capture everything. Are you sure you want to do this? Ryan asked as he helped me position it on my collar. Once you have her confession on tape, there's no going back. Your relationship with Sophie will never be the same. It's already not the same, I said. She's known for 3 years what he did to our mother. She chose him over the truth. I arrived at the restaurant early and was seated in the booth Sophie had requested, tucked in a back corner where we wouldn't be overheard. When Sophie arrived, she looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, with dark circles under expertly applied makeup. She hugged me tightly, and I forced myself to hug back to play the role of the forgiving sister. I'm so glad you called, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I've been so worried about you. Dad says you're not doing well, that you're making accusations that aren't true. I ordered a bottle of Chianti, her favorite, and made sure her glass stayed full throughout dinner. I asked about her new job, complimented her outfit, laughed at her stories. I became the Emily she remembered, the one who made everything easy for everyone else. And slowly, I watched her relax, her shoulders dropping, her smile becoming genuine. "I've been thinking a lot about Mom lately," I said carefully as we finished our entrees. "About that night. I was at work when it happened, but you were home, weren't you?" I kept my voice soft, curious rather than accusatory. Dad's story about finding her at the bottom of the stairs, it never really made sense to me. But I didn't want to seem disrespectful by questioning it. Did it ever seem strange to you? Sophie's face changed, the wine-induced relaxation evaporating. She looked around the restaurant nervously, then leaned forward. I need to tell you something, and I don't know if you'll ever forgive me." I reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture feeling like a betrayal even as I did it. "You can tell me anything." The tears came, then spilling down her cheeks, as 3 glasses of wine loosened the confession she'd been holding for 3 years. "I was home that night. I heard them fighting. Mom and Dad downstairs in his office. I could hear Mom's voice, and she was saying she had evidence of his business dealings, that she couldn't stay silent anymore, that what he was doing was wrong and people were getting hurt." My heart was pounding, but I kept my face neutral, sympathetic, encouraging her to continue. "Dad was so angry. Angrier than I'd ever heard him. He kept saying she was going to ruin everything, destroy our family, that she was being selfish and stupid." Sophie's voice dropped to barely a whisper. And then I heard Mom scream. This terrible sound, and then this awful crash like something heavy falling down the stairs. I ran to my bedroom door and opened it just a crack, and I could see Dad standing at the top of the staircase, just standing there looking down, not moving, not calling for help, just standing. I squeezed her hand, afraid that if I let go, she'd stop talking. He saw me watching. Our eyes met across the hallway, and he said so calm, it was terrifying. "Your mother fell. Go to your room. You didn't hear anything. If anyone asks, you were asleep." And then he added, "If you tell anyone what you heard, you'll be guilty too. An accessory. Do you understand?" Sophie was shaking now. I was 27 years old, a grown woman, and I was so scared of him that I just went back into my room like a little child and closed the door. I pretended to be asleep when the ambulance came. I pretended I didn't know anything. The words I'd been waiting for were finally on tape, but I felt no triumph. Only a deep, aching sadness for both of us. Sophie pulled out her phone, her hands trembling as she scrolled through photos. "There's something else. Something I found last month that explains everything." She turned the screen toward me, showing a photo of an official-looking document. "I was looking for my birth certificate in Dad's safe, and I found this instead. It's my original birth certificate, the one from the hospital. The father's name isn't Robert Parker. It's someone named Daniel Chen. I'm not Dad's biological daughter." I stared at the document, my mind reeling. Sophie continued, her words tumbling out in a rush now. "Mom had me with someone else before she married Dad. He's known my whole life that I wasn't his, and he used it as a weapon against her, against both of us. Every time Mom tried to stand up to him, he'd threaten to tell me the truth in some cruel way to make me feel like I destroyed their marriage just by existing. That's why he favored me, It wasn't love. It was control. He kept Mom trapped by using me as a hostage." Everything suddenly made horrible sense, the favoritism that never felt quite right, the way our father treated Sophie like a prized possession, rather than a daughter, the way our mother had seemed so defeated whenever Sophie was mentioned. We left the restaurant an hour later, and as we reached the parking lot, Sophie grabbed my arm with desperate strength. "Please tell me you're not just gathering evidence. Please tell me you're going to actually stop him." Her eyes were wild with fear. "Because, if he finds out I told you any of this, he's already told me what happens to people who betray him. He said betrayal is the one thing he never forgives." Sophie's confession was still replaying in my mind 2 days later, when Ryan called, his voice tight with an urgency that made my stomach drop even before he spoke. "Emily, I found something. I've been tracing your father's financial records, following the money trails through his shell companies. There's a recurring payment that's been going out every month for the past 3 years, $15,000, to a place called Rosewood Psychiatric Facility. It's a private institution in rural Oregon, the kind of place wealthy families use when they want someone to disappear quietly. I felt the room tilt. What are you saying? I drove out there this morning. I showed the receptionist a photo of your mother, the one from your grandmother's house. Emily, her face went completely white before she caught herself and said she couldn't confirm any patient information due to privacy laws. But that reaction, people don't react like that to a photo of a dead woman. The words hung in the air between us, impossible and yet suddenly horrifyingly possible. My mother is alive. I think so. I think your father never killed her. He did something worse. He made everyone believe she was dead while keeping her locked away where she couldn't tell anyone the truth. I couldn't breathe. 3 years of grief, 3 years of missing her, 3 years of living with the guilt that I hadn't been there when she needed me. And all that time she'd been alive, trapped, imprisoned, probably medicated into compliance, probably told that no one was coming for her. Within an hour, I was in Margaret Chen's office, the lawyer already pulling up her contacts in the Oregon legal system. If your mother is being held at a psychiatric facility, your father would have needed legal authority to commit her. He'd need to be listed as her medical proxy, and there would have been psychiatric evaluations, probably a court order. Margaret made several calls using her legal credentials and citing an ongoing investigation into estate fraud. 2 hours later, she had what we needed: heavily redacted medical records from Rosewood with entire sections blacked out, but enough visible to piece together the truth. Mary Catherine Parker was admitted to Rosewood Psychiatric Facility on March 16, 2022, at 3 a.m. Margaret read aloud, her voice steady despite the horror of what she was reading. Admitting diagnosis: acute psychotic break with paranoid delusions, danger to self and others. Committed by Robert Parker's spouse with medical power of attorney. Evaluating psychiatrists, Dr. Raymond Brenner and Dr. Lisa Huang. I pulled up my laptop and searched both names. It took less than 5 minutes to find the connection. Dr. Brenner had been on my father's corporate payroll for 2 years as a wellness consultant for his import business. Dr. Huang's private practice had received 6-figure consulting fees from one of my father's shell companies. They weren't independent evaluators, they were paid accomplices. He pushed her down the stairs. I said, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. He injured her badly enough that she seemed disoriented, maybe had a head injury. Then he called his paid psychiatrists instead of a regular ambulance. They diagnosed her as mentally unstable, had her committed before she could tell anyone what had really happened. And then he told everyone she was dead. Margaret's face was grim. It's called conservatorship abuse. It's been in the news lately with several high-profile cases. Someone gets declared mentally incompetent, usually with questionable medical evaluations, and then they're essentially imprisoned with no rights. The conservator controls everything: where they live, who they can contact, what medications they're given. We called an emergency meeting with Detective Chen and Ryan. Margaret laid out our options in her conference room documents spread across the table like evidence of a crime we were only beginning to understand the full scope of. We can't just show up and demand her release, Margaret explained. Your father has legal authority as her medical proxy. The facility will claim they're following proper procedures protecting a vulnerable patient. We need to go through the courts. She was already drafting the paperwork as she spoke. I'm filing a petition for competency review, arguing that Mary Parker was improperly committed and has been held against her will based on fraudulent psychiatric evaluations. We're requesting an independent evaluation by a psychiatrist with no connection to your father, and we're asking for an expedited court hearing. Detective Chen added, given that Robert Parker is now under active FBI investigation for money laundering, and we're looking at him for potential homicide, I can provide an affidavit supporting the petition. The fact that 2 psychiatrists who signed off on her commitment are on his payroll is highly suspicious. Margaret made calls to judges she knew pulled strings I didn't understand, leveraged connections built over decades of practice. By the end of the day, she had what we needed. There's a hearing scheduled in 7 days. A judge in Oregon reviewed the circumstances, no prior mental health history commitment by a spouse under criminal investigation, no family visits allowed for 3 years, and agreed this warrants immediate review. She looked at me, her expression both hopeful and cautious. Emily, in 1 week, you'll either see your mother again or we'll have definitive proof of what happened to her. But I need you to prepare yourself for what you might find. 3 years in a place like that, if they've been heavily medicating her, if she's been told repeatedly that no one believes her, that everyone thinks she's dead, the psychological trauma could be severe. She may not be the same person you remember. I was about to respond when my phone rang. The screen showed unknown number. Something made me answer it, some instinct I couldn't name. Hello? There was silence on the other end, just breathing. Then a voice I knew better than my own, weak and hoarse and broken, but unmistakably hers. Emily, baby, is that you? My knees went weak. I grabbed the edge of Margaret's desk to keep from falling. Mom. Oh God, you're real, you're alive! Emily, please tell me you're coming to get me? Her voice cracked, years of desperation pouring through the phone. I've been trying to get out. I've been trying to tell them, but he said no one would believe me. He said everyone thinks I'm dead. He said you think I'm dead. Emily, please, I need you to know I'm here. I'm alive. I'm at a place called Rosewood, and I need you to come get me before he... The line went dead. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, tears streaming down my face, and for the first time in 3 years, I heard my mother's voice, terrified but alive. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. at the Clackamas County Courthouse, a modest building in rural Oregon that looked nothing like the grand Seattle courtrooms I'd imagined. Margaret, Ryan, and I drove down together the night before, staying at a highway motel because none of us could sleep anyway. Detective Chen met us at the courthouse steps at 8:30, her presence a reminder that this wasn't just about freeing my mother, it was about building a criminal case against my father. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wooden benches that creaked and fluorescent lights that buzzed. But it was packed. Margaret had made sure of that, inviting advocates for psychiatric rights reporters from papers that covered conservatorship abuse and representatives from organizations that fought against unlawful commitment. My father sat across the aisle with 3 lawyers in expensive suits, his posture radiating the calm authority of a man who believed he was untouchable. He looked exactly like what he wanted to appear, a concerned husband fighting for his sick wife's best interests. I kept my eyes on the door where they'd bring my mother, and my heart hammering so hard I thought everyone could hear it. When the bailiff finally opened it and led her inside, I had to press my hand over my mouth to keep from crying out. She looked like a ghost of herself. The woman who walked slowly into that courtroom was rail-thin, her cheekbones sharp beneath papery skin. Her hair, once dark brown like mine, was completely gray and cut in a harsh institutional style. She moved carefully, as if her body had forgotten how to navigate space. Her shoulders hunched like she was trying to make herself smaller. But when she saw me in the front row, something changed. Her eyes, which had been dull and distant, suddenly focused with an intensity that took my breath away. Recognition flooded her face, followed by such desperate hope that I felt tears streaming down my cheeks. The independent psychiatrist testified first. Dr. Victoria Chang was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of authoritative presence that commanded attention. She'd spent 3 sessions with my mother over the past week, conducting comprehensive evaluations that Margaret had insisted be videotaped to prevent any claims of coaching or manipulation. After extensive evaluation of Mrs. Mary Parker, Dr. Chang said, her voice clear and professional, "I find no evidence of psychosis, delusions, paranoia, or any psychiatric condition that would warrant involuntary commitment to a psychiatric facility. Mrs. Parker is fully oriented to person, place, and time. Her memory is intact. Her thought processes are logical and coherent. Her understanding of her circumstances is not only rational, but remarkably accurate given the trauma she has endured. In my professional opinion, Mrs. Parker was improperly committed and has been unlawfully held for 3 years." My father's lawyers objected, tried to claim that Dr. Chang hadn't reviewed the original commitment documents properly, that she didn't understand the complexity of my mother's condition. But the judge, a gray-haired woman named Patricia Morrison, who'd been on the bench for 20 years, cut them off with a sharp look. Then it was my mother's turn to testify. She walked to the witness stand slowly, and I watched my father's lawyers exchange confident glances, clearly expecting her to fall apart to prove their case that she was unstable. But when my mother sat down and placed her hands carefully on the railing in front of her, there was a steadiness in her posture that surprised everyone. "Mrs. Parker," Margaret began gently, "can you tell the court what happened on the night of March 15th, 2022? My mother's voice was quiet at first, hoarse from disuse, but it grew stronger as she spoke. "My husband didn't save me from mental illness. He imprisoned me to silence me. That night I told Robert I had evidence of his money laundering operation. I'd spent months copying files from his office, photographing financial records, documenting his business with a man named Vincent Torres. I told him I was taking everything to the FBI the next morning." She paused, and I saw her hands tighten on the railing. "He pushed me down the stairs. Not an accident. Not a fall. He put both hands on my shoulders and shoved me backward with enough force that I tumbled all the way to the bottom. I remember lying there unable to move, thinking I was going to die. But he didn't call 911 right away. He called Dr. Brenner and Dr. Huang first. They arrived before the ambulance and they gave me an injection that made everything fuzzy. When I woke up, I was at Rosewood." My father's lead attorney stood up. "Your Honor, Mrs. Parker has clearly been coached." "Sit down, counselor," Judge Morrison said sharply. "Mrs. Parker, please continue." "For 3 years I've been told I'm delusional, that my memories are false, that my family is dead or doesn't care about me, that if I tell anyone the truth, no one will believe me because I'm the crazy woman." Her voice broke slightly. "They've kept me medicated, isolated, told me that my daughters think I'm dead. And I believed it because what else could I believe when no one came?" She looked directly at me, then tears streaming down her face. "But my Emily came. My brave girl found me." The courtroom was completely silent. Even my father's lawyers seemed at a loss for words. Detective Chen stood from her seat in the back and walked forward, her badge visible on her belt. "Your Honor, based on Mrs. Parker's testimony and evidence gathered in an ongoing investigation, I have warrants for the arrest of Robert Parker on charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, elder abuse conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of justice. Additionally, the FBI has requested he be held without bail as a flight risk in their money laundering investigation." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters scrambled for their phones. The advocates for psychiatric rights were on their feet, and my father's face transformed in an instant from dignified concern to cold, murderous rage. As 2 officers approached him with handcuffs, he looked directly at me and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You have no idea what you've just done to this family. You'll regret this." But I was already moving toward the witness stand where my mother had collapsed into sobs. I took her frail hands in mine and said softly, "Mom, you're free. You're coming home." For the first time in 3 years, my mother smiled. We left the courthouse an hour later, my mother leaning heavily on my arm as we walked through a crowd of reporters and cameras. Margaret had arranged for a car to take us directly to Seattle, where a doctor was waiting to evaluate my mother and begin the process of reversing 3 years of unnecessary medication. My phone buzzed as we reached the parking lot. A text from Sophie. "Dad's lawyer just called me. He says if you don't drop all charges and recant Mom's testimony, he's going to release information that will destroy you, Mom and me. He knows things, Em. Things about all of us." Sophie's threatening text hung over us as we drove back to Seattle, but I refused to let my father's lawyers intimidate me now. Not after everything we'd been through. My mother sat in the back seat staring out the window like she couldn't quite believe she was free, her thin fingers occasionally reaching up to touch the glass as if to confirm it was real. We brought her to my apartment, and over the next few days I watched her slowly come back to life. The fog of medication began to lift, color returned to her cheeks, She started eating real meals instead of picking at her food like she'd forgotten how. And one evening, as we sat together on my couch, she reached up to her neck and pulled out a thin gold chain I hadn't noticed before. "Your grandmother's engagement ring," she said, sliding it off the chain. "It was the only piece of jewelry they let me keep at Rosewood. Robert told them it had sentimental value, that taking it would upset me and make my condition worse." Her smile was bitter. He didn't know what I'd done to it before he had me committed. She handed me the ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Look inside." I held it up to the light but couldn't see anything unusual. Mary got up and returned with a magnifying glass from my desk drawer. "Here, look at the inside of the band." Through the magnifying glass, I could see them numbers engraved so small they were almost invisible, etched in a careful hand: 4729 8831 CH 7743. "What is this?" "An offshore account number," Mary said quietly. "Cayman Islands. Your father opened it in 2019 to hide the money he makes from Vincent Torres. That account has over $3 million in it, money from drug operations laundered through his legitimate business. I found the account statements in his office safe one night, when he'd had too much to drink and forgotten to close it properly. I photographed everything and saved the images on one of the USB drives I buried in the garden. Then I took this ring to a jeweler I trusted and had him engrave the account number inside where Robert would never think to look. $3 million. On top of the stolen inheritance, on top of the 15% cut from every smuggling operation. My father hadn't just been stealing from us, he'd been building an empire on blood money. The next morning, a man in a dark suit appeared at my door, flashing an FBI badge. Special Agent Marcus Webb was in his 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of calm authority that came from years of taking down criminal organizations. He'd been working with Ryan for months and had been waiting for exactly this, a witness with direct knowledge of Robert Parker's financial crimes. "Miss Parker, with your mother's testimony and the evidence you've gathered, we have enough to bring down not just your father but Vincent Torres's entire network," Agent Webb explained, sitting across from us at my kitchen table. "Your father kept meticulous records. He's the kind of criminal who thinks he's too smart to get caught, so he documents everything. If you and your mother are willing to testify in federal court, we can offer you both witness protection and ensure your father never sees freedom again." I agreed immediately, but my mother hesitated, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. "They took 3 years of my life," she said quietly. "What if they take more? What if they come after Emily and Sophie?" I took her hand. "Then we fight. Together this time. No more hiding, no more being afraid. We take them all down." At 3 a.m, 2 days later, frantic pounding on my door jolted me awake. I looked through the peephole to see Sophie mascara streaming down her face, shaking so hard she could barely stand. I opened the door and she practically fell into my arms. "They served me," she sobbed. "A subpoena. They're making me testify in Dad's criminal trial and in the FBI's investigation. His lawyers called me M. They said if I testify, I'll be admitting I knew about the money laundering and didn't report it. They're saying I could be charged as an accessory." She looked up at me with desperate eyes. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to be loved, to be safe. I didn't know loving him meant protecting a monster." I called Ryan, who arrived within 20 minutes, his face grim. "Vincent Torres knows everything now. He knows Mary testified, knows about the FBI investigation, knows you have evidence. He's putting pressure on your father to handle his family problems." He looked at each of us in turn. "That's code for silencing witnesses. We need to move all of you to a safe house. Tonight. Torres doesn't make empty threats." We were throwing clothes into bags, moving with the kind of urgent efficiency that comes from real fear, when my laptop chimed with an incoming email. The sender was Donald Chen, my father's attorney. The subject line read "Final Warning." I opened it with shaking hands. There was no text in the body of the email, just a single photograph my apartment building photographed from across the street, the angle suggesting it had been taken from a parked car. The image was crystal clear, showing my living room window on the second floor. And digitally superimposed over that window was a red crosshair, the kind you'd see through a rifle scope. The message was unmistakable. They knew where we were. They were watching. And they wanted us to know that if we didn't back down, they could reach us any time they wanted. Ryan saw my face and grabbed the laptop. "We're leaving. Right now. Don't pack anything else, just go." As we rushed toward the door, my mother clutching the lockbox with her evidence, Sophie still crying, Ryan already on the phone with Agent Webb, I realized we'd crossed a line we could never uncross. This wasn't just about family betrayal anymore. This was war. We drove through the night to reach the FBI safe house, a nondescript ranch-style home in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Portland. Agent Webb had 2 other agents waiting for us, and they swept us inside, quickly closing curtains and activating a security system before any of us could even catch our breath. The house was generic and sterile, furnished with the kind of furniture that came from bulk orders, beige couches, laminate tables, bare walls. But it was secure, and for the moment, that was all that mattered. Sophie had barely stopped crying since we left my apartment. She sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her whole body shaking while my mother made tea in the kitchen with trembling hands that suggested she was close to her own breaking point. Ryan stood by the window watching the street through a gap in the curtains, his jaw tight with tension. "Sophie," I said gently, sitting down beside her. "We need to know everything. No more secrets, no more protecting him. If we're going to stop Dad, we need the complete truth." She looked at me with red, swollen eyes, and something in her expression shifted. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else, a kind of desperate determination, like someone who'd been drowning and had finally decided to fight for air. "I've known I wasn't his biological daughter since I was 16, she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "I found my birth certificate while I was looking for my passport for a school trip. The father's name wasn't Robert Parker. It was Daniel Chen. I confronted Mom about it, and she told me the truth that Daniel was her boyfriend before Robert, that he died in a car accident 6 months before I was born. She married Robert when she was 3 months pregnant because she was desperate and scared and had no one else." My mother had stopped moving in the kitchen, frozen with the tea kettle in her hand, tears streaming down her face as she listened to Sophie speak. "Robert agreed to raise me as his own, but he never let Mom forget that he was doing her a favor. And he held it over me too once I knew. Every expensive gift, every act of favoritism, they all came with strings attached. The car he bought me, the apartment he paid for, the job at his company, all of it was designed to keep me dependent and compliant. When Mom started talking about going to the FBI, he told me that if she went through with it, he'd make sure everyone knew I was illegitimate. He said he'd tell the story in the most humiliating way possible, that I'd lose everything, that no one would ever respect me again." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that night. The night he pushed her." My mother came into the living room, then setting down the tea with shaking hands before sitting on Sophie's other side. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do," Sophie interrupted. "I have to say it all out loud, or I'll never be free of it." She took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was stronger. "I came out of my room when I heard them arguing. I stood at the end of the hallway where neither of them could see me. Mom was holding a folder. I could see it was full of documents. She was saying, 'I'm not letting you use drug money to pay for our life anymore. I won't be complicit in this.' Dad was trying to grab the folder, and Mom kept pulling away, backing up toward the staircase. Sophie's hands were fisted in the blanket, now her knuckles white. He didn't just push her. He grabbed her shoulders with both hands and shoved her backward with so much force. The look on his face, it wasn't anger. It was cold calculation, like he was disposing of something that had outlived its usefulness. Mom fell backward down the entire staircase. I heard her body hit each step, and then this awful sound when her head hit the bottom. I'll never forget that sound. My mother was crying silently now, and I reached across Sophie to take her hand. Dad just stood there at the top of the stairs looking down at her, not moving, not calling for help, just watching. Then he looked up and saw me standing there. Our eyes met, and he said completely calm, "She fell. Do you understand me? She fell and you were asleep in your room." I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just nodded. And then I heard him on the phone saying things like, "I need this handled quietly," and "she's becoming a liability." He wasn't calling 911, he was calling those doctors. Sophie turned to look at my mother directly. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry I didn't tell the truth. I'm so sorry I let him keep you locked away for 3 years because I was too scared to—" My mother pulled Sophie into her arms, holding her tight. "You were just a child yourself," she said, her voice breaking. "Not in years, but in every way that mattered. He manipulated you your whole life. I should have gotten us both away from him years ago. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." They held each other both crying, and I felt something shift in the room, a weight lifting, a bond reforming in a way that was healthier and stronger than it had ever been before. Agent Webb had been standing quietly in the doorway, and now he stepped forward. "Miss Parker Sophie, what you just described is eyewitness testimony to attempted murder and kidnapping. If you're willing to say all of this under oath, we can ensure your father never has the opportunity to hurt anyone again." Sophie pulled back from my mother and wiped her eyes. When she looked at Agent Webb, there was a fierce determination in her face I'd never seen before. "I'll testify. I'll tell everything I saw and heard. I don't care what threats he makes or what his lawyers say. He took my real childhood, he took my mother from me for 3 years, and he made me into someone I'm ashamed of. I won't be that person anymore." I looked at my sister and saw, perhaps for the first time in our lives, not the spoiled younger sibling who'd always gotten everything, but another survivor of our father's systematic abuse. Another victim who was choosing finally to become a witness instead. Agent Webb's phone rang. He stepped into the hallway to answer it, and I watched through the doorway as his expression changed from professional calm to grim concern. When he came back into the room, every muscle in my body tensed. "Robert Parker made bail an hour ago," he said. His attorney argued he's not a flight risk because of his community ties and his business interests. He posted $500,000 cash and walked out. "We need to assume he knows where you are." The news that my father had made bail sent a wave of cold fear through all of us. But Margaret Chen arrived at the safe house 2 hours later with a leather portfolio that suggested she'd been preparing for this moment. Agent Webb led her through the security checkpoint, and she came into the living room where we'd all gathered, her expression both solemn and determined. "I need to be honest with both of you about something I should have disclosed earlier," Margaret said, looking between my mother and me. "I'm not just Catherine's former attorney, I'm her younger sister, your great-aunt. Catherine and I were estranged from our family for years because of choices we made that our parents didn't approve of. When she married your grandfather, we reconnected, and I've been watching over both of you from a distance your whole lives." I stared at her, this woman who'd seemed like a stranger just weeks ago, suddenly revealed as family. My mother's hand went to her mouth, tears already forming. "Your grandmother came to me in 2016, about a year before she died," Margaret continued. "She said Robert was dangerous. She didn't have proof yet of his criminal activities, but she knew his character, knew he was capable of terrible things. She wanted to ensure her granddaughters would have resources to escape if they ever needed to. That's why the trust was set up the way it was, not just as inheritance, but as escape funds. Money that would give you the power to leave, to fight back, to build lives independent of his control." Margaret opened her portfolio and pulled out a document I'd never seen before. "There's more. Your grandmother created a secondary codicil to her will, properly executed and notarized just 3 days before she died. If anything happened to Mary, this document activates automatically." She laid it on the coffee table in front of me. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out. Catherine Chen Foundation for Family Justice. Emily Jane Parker named director. Full authority over foundation resources. Endowment of $2 million. "Your grandmother didn't just leave you money," Margaret explained. "She left you a mission. The Catherine Chen Foundation was established in 1995, quietly funded over the years. Its purpose is to help women and children escape from abusive family situations, providing legal aid, safe housing, financial support, everything someone needs to break free from control. Your grandmother wanted you to have not just money, but purpose and a platform to help others who were going through what she suspected you might someday face. I read through the document with shaking hands. It was all there: my name, my authority, my responsibility. My grandmother had seen into the future and prepared a weapon for me to use against my father, a way to turn my pain into power. Your grandmother knew, Margaret said softly, that Robert would eventually cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She prepared for this day. My mother had been quiet through all of this, but now she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small spiral notebook, the kind you'd buy at a drugstore. Its pages were covered in tiny, cramped handwriting. "I need to show you something too," she said, her voice steadier than I'd heard it since we'd freed her from Rosewood. I wasn't just sitting in that place surviving. I was planning. Every time Robert visited with his lawyers thinking I was too drugged to understand, I memorized what they said. Every time I overheard account numbers or business discussions, I wrote them down in code in this notebook. The staff thought it was just a crazy woman's ramblings, so they never bothered to take it from me. She opened the notebook and I saw page after page of careful notes. Names of Robert's business associates, dates of meetings, account numbers, amounts transferred, details about bribes paid to Dr. Brenner and Dr. Huang, staff members at Rosewood who'd been paid to keep her sedated and isolated. "He thought he broke me," my mother said, and there was steel in her voice now. "But every single day I remembered what your grandmother used to say to me when I was first married to Robert and things were already becoming difficult. She'd say, 'Mary, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's surviving and then thriving.' For 3 years I survived. I documented everything. I waited. And now it's time to thrive." I looked at these two women, my great-aunt who'd been protecting us in secret for decades, my mother who'd endured 3 years of imprisonment and turned it into evidence, and felt something shift inside me. We weren't victims anymore. We were an army. I was reaching for the foundation documents, thinking about how we could use these resources to protect not just ourselves but others when my phone rang. The screen showed "blocked number," and my stomach clenched. I answered on speaker so Agent Webb could hear. My father's voice came through cold and measured the tone of a man who still believed he held all the cards. "Emily, your mother's Sophie and that lawyer can testify all they want. But I have one card left to play that will make all of you wish you'd stayed quiet. Check your email. You have 24 hours to decide if you want to proceed." The line went dead. I opened my email on my laptop with Agent Webb standing directly behind me, his phone already recording the screen in case we needed documentation. The message from my father was waiting in my inbox, the subject line blank, the sender an email address I didn't recognize, but that Webb confirmed was routing through several proxy servers my father's attempt at anonymity that would ultimately prove useless. The email contained a link to a private website, password protected. My father had helpfully included the login credentials in his message. I clicked through and what loaded made my blood run cold. The site was professionally designed, laid out like a news article, complete with official-looking headers and multiple pages of content. There were scanned copies of my medical records from college showing prescriptions for anxiety medication and therapy sessions during the months after my mother's supposed death. There was Sophie's DUI arrest report from 2 years ago, complete with mugshot and blood alcohol levels, an arrest that had mysteriously disappeared from public records. And there were pages upon pages of psychiatric evaluations from Rosewood Dr. Brenner and Dr. Huang's assessments painting my mother as dangerously delusional paranoid, a threat to herself and others. Below all of this was my father's message written in the calm, reasonable tone of a man who believed he was being persecuted. "I'll release all of this to every major media outlet in Seattle. I'll tell them the story of a vindictive daughter with a history of mental instability. A alcoholic younger daughter with a criminal record and a mentally ill wife whose delusions have poisoned them both against me. I'll explain how they're making these accusations to get control of family money they don't deserve. I'll destroy your credibility before you ever set foot in a courtroom. Drop all charges, sign over Catherine's foundation to Sophie under my management as trustee, and I'll disappear from your lives. You'll never hear from me again. Keep pushing, and I'll make sure no one ever believes another word any of you say. I felt sick reading it, imagining how this would play in the court of public opinion, how my father would twist every difficult moment of our lives into proof that we were the problem, not him. But Agent Webb was smiling. Actually smiling. He just gave us everything we need. Webb said, his fingers already moving over his own phone. This email was sent from his personal device. We can trace the headers. The content explicitly threatens and attempts to intimidate witnesses in an active federal investigation. And here's the best part, his bail conditions specifically prohibited him from contacting any family members involved in this case. Any contact. This isn't just witness tampering. This is a separate felony violation of his pretrial release terms. Within 2 hours, federal marshals were at my father's house in Seattle with a new arrest warrant. I watched the operation via a video feed Agent Webb set up, seeing armed officers approach the blue house on Maple Street where I'd grown up. They knocked, announced themselves, waited the required time, then breached the door. The house was empty. Not just empty of people, but deliberately cleared out. Closets stood open, drawers pulled out, papers scattered across my father's home office like he'd been sorting through what to take and what to leave behind. In the master bedroom, agents found his passport on the dresser, the one he'd been required to surrender as a condition of bail, but had apparently kept a copy of before turning in what he claimed was his only document. But a search of his safe left open in his haste revealed something more damaging. A second passport, this one listing his name as Robert J. Parker instead of Robert James Parker. It was a legal document obtained years ago by filing paperwork under his middle initial instead of his full middle name, creating a separate identity that would pass casual scrutiny. He's running, Webb said, his expression grim. But here's what he doesn't understand. Running is the best thing he could have done for our case. A jury sees a man who fled while out on bail and they see guilt. They see consciousness of wrongdoing. He's just eliminated his best defense, which would have been to stay and fight to act like an innocent man being persecuted. Webb was right about something else too. Within 24 hours of my father's disappearance, his entire criminal network began to collapse. Vincent Torres, learning that Robert had fled and fearing he'd cut a deal with federal prosecutors to save himself, contacted his own lawyer and began negotiating cooperation with the FBI. Torres's testimony would provide evidence about years of money laundering operations, implicating not just my father but dozens of other players in the smuggling network. My father's legitimate business partners, seeing the federal investigation heating up and their associate fleeing like a fugitive, started producing documents they'd previously claimed didn't exist. Financial records, email chains, meeting notes, everything they needed to prove they'd been kept in the dark about Robert's illegal activities, all of it coincidentally implicating him further. The empire of control my father had built over decades was crumbling, and he'd triggered the collapse himself by running. 3 days after his disappearance, Agent Webb got a call from Canadian Border Patrol. They'd detained a man matching Robert Parker's description trying to cross into British Columbia using a fake ID. Webb mobilized immediately, coordinating with Canadian authorities for extradition procedures. But 2 hours later, his phone rang again. I watched his expression change from satisfaction to confusion to grim realization as he listened. "Facial recognition came back," he said after hanging up. "It's not him. It's a decoy someone Robert paid to match his description and cross at the most obvious point. Probably gave him $5,000, and the fake ID told him it was for something minor. The guy's already admitted he was hired to create a distraction." Webb pulled up a map on his laptop tracing routes south from Seattle. "He's not going to Canada. He's heading south, probably to Mexico. And there's only one person with the connections to help him disappear across that border, Vincent Torres's cousin Miguel, who runs a smuggling route through Tijuana." Agent Webb coordinated with Mexican federal authorities, and within 48 hours they had a location. Robert was hiding in a compound outside Tijuana, a sprawling property owned by Miguel Torres, where the smuggling network processed both drugs and human trafficking victims before moving them across the border. The raid happened at dawn, Mexican police moving in with tactical precision, while FBI agents observed from a command center in San Diego. They found Robert in a warehouse on the property, unshaven and disheveled, looking nothing like the polished businessman who'd walked out on bail. Miguel Torres and 6 other members of the organization were arrested alongside him. Within 72 hours, Robert was extradited back to the United States, and this time when he appeared before a judge, there was no bail offered. He was remanded to federal detention pending trial. The charges had expanded significantly: money laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy, kidnapping, false imprisonment, witness tampering, flight from justice. And based on my mother's evidence and Sophie's testimony, the district attorney added voluntary manslaughter under Washington state law. They explained to me that while they couldn't charge murder because my mother had survived the assault that resulted in her 3-year imprisonment qualified as manslaughter intentional harm that resulted in serious bodily injury. The trial began on a cold January morning. The federal courthouse in Seattle was packed, every seat in the gallery filled with reporters, advocates for domestic violence victims, and people who'd been following this case as it evolved from a stolen car into something that exposed the dark underbelly of abuse in wealthy families. My mother took the stand on the second day of testimony. She wore a simple blue dress that Margaret had helped her pick out, her gray hair styled neatly, her hands steady as she placed them on the railing of the witness box. She looked nothing like the broken woman we'd rescued from Rosewood. She looked strong. The prosecutor walked her through 30 years of marriage to Robert Parker, and my mother described it all in clear, unflinching detail. The financial control that kept her dependent, the psychological manipulation that made her doubt her own perceptions, the threats he made against Sophie whenever she considered leaving. And then the prosecutor asked her to describe the night of March 15, 2022. My mother turned to look directly at my father, who sat at the defense table between his lawyers, his expression carefully neutral. "He didn't just push me down those stairs," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "He looked me in the eyes and said, 'You think you can destroy what I've built. You're nothing without me. You'll be nothing when I'm done with you.' Then he grabbed my shoulders and shoved me backward with both hands. I remember falling, my body hitting each step, the pain, and then my head hitting the floor at the bottom. I remember lying there unable to move, looking up at the top of the staircase and seeing him standing there watching me, just watching. And I thought, this is how I die. But I didn't die. He had something worse planned." Sophie testified the next day. She looked different from the woman I'd known my whole life. No designer clothes, no carefully applied makeup, just a plain gray suit, and her face bare of artifice. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but absolutely steady. "I was raised to protect my father above all else," she began. "To believe that family loyalty meant silence, that love meant obedience, that questioning him meant I was ungrateful. I was 27 years old, a grown woman, and I was still too afraid of him to tell the truth about what I saw that night." She described everything, standing in the hallway, watching the assault, hearing my father's threats, being ordered to her room. The defense attorney, a sharp-faced man named Morrison, tried to discredit her during cross-examination. "Isn't it true, Miss Parker, that you're only testifying because your sister convinced you to turn against your father?" Sophie looked at me where I sat in the gallery, then back at Morrison. "No, I'm testifying because my father taught me that love looks like control and fear, and I'm done being controlled and afraid. I'm testifying because silence makes you complicit, and I won't be complicit anymore." The courtroom was absolutely silent when she finished. Even the reporters had stopped typing. As the judge called for recess, I gathered my things and headed toward the hallway where Margaret was waiting. But before I could reach her, Morrison approached her with a flash drive in his hand. I hung back watching as he spoke to her in low tones. Margaret's expression shifted from professional courtesy to shock, to something I couldn't quite read. When Morrison walked away, she turned to find me already standing there. "What was that about?" I asked. Margaret's face was pale. "Your father wants to make a deal. He'll plead guilty to all the financial crimes and serve 15 years, but he wants the manslaughter charge dropped." She paused, her hand tightening on the flash drive. "And in exchange, he says he'll give us information about something you don't know. Information about your own birth that changes everything. He's asking for 24 hours to present this offer formally." I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. "What information?" "I don't know," Margaret said. "But Emily, we need to be prepared for the possibility that your father has one more secret left to weaponize." Margaret called an emergency meeting at her office that night. My mother and I arrived just before midnight, the building dark except for the light coming from Margaret's corner office on the 3rd floor. She had coffee waiting, but none of us touched it. We were all too tense, too aware that my father was trying one last manipulation. "Before we respond to anything," Margaret said carefully, settling behind her desk, "I need to tell you something I've known since Catherine died. Emily, there's information about your parentage that your grandmother made me promise not to reveal unless it became legally necessary. I think we're at that point." She opened a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope yellowed with age. Catherine's signature was written across the seal in blue ink, and my name was written on the front in her careful handwriting. "Your grandmother gave this to me in 2016 with specific instructions about when you should receive it." Margaret slid the envelope across the desk to me. "I think you should read it now before your father tries to use this information as a weapon." My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, 3 pages written in my grandmother's script, dated October 2016. "My dearest Emily," it began. "If you're reading this, then Margaret has determined you need to know the truth about your birth. Robert Parker is not your biological father." The words seemed to swim on the page. I had to read them 3 times before they penetrated. "Your mother had a brief relationship with a man named James Chen after she broke off her first engagement. James was my nephew Margaret's son. When Mary discovered she was pregnant with you, James wanted to be involved. He was excited about becoming a father. But he was killed in a construction accident before you were born, a terrible tragedy that devastated our entire family. Mary was alone, frightened and grieving. Robert offered to marry her and claim you as his own. I begged her not to accept, told her our family would support her. But she was scared and young and didn't believe she had other options. Robert legally adopted you as an infant, so you've never known any different." I looked up at Margaret and suddenly so many things made sense. The way she'd been watching over me, the urgency in her help, the personal investment she had in my case. "James was your son," I whispered. "He was," Margaret said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And you're his daughter, my granddaughter." My mother was crying openly now, reaching for my hand across the desk. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I should have told you years ago. I thought I was protecting you by keeping the secret, but I just gave Robert more power to hurt you." Everything suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. "He wasn't just a bad father," I said slowly, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "He was punishing me my entire life for not being his biological child. Every time he favored Sophie, every time he dismissed my accomplishments, every time he made me feel worthless, it was because I reminded him that you had loved someone else first. I was living proof that he was second choice." My mother nodded miserably. "He held it over me constantly. Whenever I tried to stand up to him, he'd say things like, 'Remember, I'm raising another man's child. I could walk away any time.' He made me feel like I owed him everything because he'd taken me in when I was pregnant and alone." Margaret leaned forward. "James was a good man, Emily. Kind, gentle, brilliant. He was studying to be an architect. He would have loved you so much. I've watched you your whole life trying to honor my son's memory by keeping you safe from a distance. I should have done more. I should have told you the truth and gotten you away from Robert years ago." The next morning, we were back in the courthouse. Robert's attorney had arranged a formal presentation of the plea deal with the judge-prosecutors and all parties present. A video screen was set up so Robert could participate from federal detention. When his face appeared on the screen, he looked directly at me with cold calculation. "I'll spare everyone a longer trial if Emily acknowledges publicly that she's not my biological daughter and has no claim to the Parker name or any assets associated with my legitimate business holdings. I want it on record that I owe her nothing, that I gave her 34 years of a home and name she didn't deserve, and that she's tried to destroy me out of misplaced vengeance." It was a final attempt at control, at humiliation, at making me feel less than human. But I'd had all night to process the truth, and something had shifted inside me. I wasn't his victim anymore. I never had been his daughter, and I was grateful for it. I stood, and the judge nodded permission for me to speak. "I don't want your name," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I don't want your money. I want you in prison where you can't hurt anyone else. My grandmother left me everything I need, including the truth about who I really am. You can keep your tainted legacy." The prosecutor stood immediately, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Your Honor, in light of new evidence provided by the defendant's own DNA test results, which he's unwisely included in his plea bargaining materials, the state is adding charges of identity fraud. Mr. Parker collected death benefits and insurance payouts for dependents using Emily Parker's name for 34 years while knowing she had no biological connection to him. That's systematic fraud spanning decades. The deal is rejected." Robert's face on the screen went white with rage. For once, his manipulation had backfired completely. The trial continued for another week after Robert's failed plea deal. The prosecution methodically presented evidence of every crime, financial records tracing the money laundering testimony from Vincent Torres about their smuggling partnership, medical documents from Rosewood proving my mother's unlawful imprisonment, and the DNA evidence that confirmed I wasn't Robert's biological child while he'd been claiming me as a dependent for tax purposes for 34 years. Robert never took the stand in his own defense. His lawyers advised against it, knowing the prosecution would tear him apart on cross-examination. So he sat silent and stone-faced at the defense table for 3 weeks, showing nothing while witness after witness exposed the depth of his crimes. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, none of them looked at Robert, a sign Margaret whispered to me that they'd convicted. The forewoman stood a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes who'd been taking meticulous notes throughout the trial. "On the count of money laundering in the first degree, how do you find guilty? On the count of wire fraud, guilty. 18 counts of money laundering, 12 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of kidnapping for my mother's imprisonment, 1 count of false imprisonment, 34 counts of identity fraud, 1 for each year he'd fraudulently claimed me as his dependent, 3 counts of witness tampering, and finally 1 count of voluntary manslaughter for the assault that had led to my mother's 3 years in captivity. Guilty, guilty, guilty." The word echoed through the courtroom over and over. Robert sat completely motionless, but I could see his hands gripping the edge of the table, knuckles white, the only visible sign that he was hearing his life as a free man end with each verdict. When the forewoman read the final count, guilty of voluntary manslaughter, I heard Sophie make a sound behind me, something between a sob and an exhale, like she'd been holding her breath for years and could finally let it go. 2 weeks later, we returned for sentencing. This was our chance to speak directly to Robert, to tell him in our own words what he'd done to us. The courtroom was packed again, but this time it felt different. This wasn't about presenting evidence or arguing law. This was about truth. My mother went first. She stood at the podium facing the judge, but her words were directed at Robert. "You wanted to erase me," she said, her voice steady and clear. "To make me disappear because I threatened the comfortable life you'd built on crime and control. You put me in that place and told the world I was dead. You let my daughters grieve for me while I was locked in a room being told I was crazy. You took 3 years of my life that I will never get back. But I'm still here. I survived you. And now you're the one who's disappearing." Sophie spoke next, tears streaming down her face, but her voice growing stronger as she continued. "I thought you loved me. For 30 years I believed that the gifts, the attention, the favoritism, I thought it meant I was special to you. But you just loved how useful I was for controlling Mom. Every time you bought me something, every time you chose me over Emily, it wasn't love. It was a chain. I was never your daughter. I was your hostage." Then it was my turn. I'd written a long statement, pages of everything I wanted to say, but when I stood at that podium and looked at the man who'd raised me, I realized I didn't need all those words. I folded the paper and spoke from my heart instead. For 34 years, I believed something was wrong with me, that I wasn't good enough, smart enough, worthy enough of love. You made me feel invisible and worthless. But now I understand there was nothing wrong with me. There was everything wrong with you. And the most powerful thing I can say to you now is this: I forgive myself for ever believing your lies. And I don't need your apology because you're nothing to me now. Judge Patricia Morrison had been on the bench for 30 years. She'd seen every kind of criminal, every kind of crime. But when she looked down at Robert Parker, her expression was one of pure disgust. "Mr. Parker, I've presided over many white-collar crimes, many family abuse cases, many instances of financial fraud. But rarely have I seen such calculated, systematic cruelty combined with such complete absence of remorse. You didn't just commit crimes for financial gain. You tortured your family psychologically for decades. You imprisoned your wife to silence her. You robbed your daughter of both her inheritance and her sense of self-worth. You manipulated another young woman using the secret of her parentage as a weapon." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This court sentences you to 28 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, to be followed by 3 consecutive 10-year sentences at the state level for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and manslaughter. This is effective life imprisonment. Your assets are seized to pay restitution to your victims and the families harmed by your money laundering operation. You will have no contact with your former wife or daughters. Officers take him away." 2 marshals moved forward to escort Robert from the courtroom. He stood slowly, and as they led him toward the door in his orange jumpsuit and chains, he stopped, turned back. For just a moment, I saw his mask slip. There was something in his eyes that might have been fear or regret, or the dawning realization of what the rest of his life would be. But then it was gone, and he was just a stranger being led away to spend the rest of his life in a cage. 6 months passed after the sentencing. I threw myself into work at the foundation, helped my mother settle into her new apartment, supported Sophie as she started therapy, and began rebuilding her life. But there was something unfinished, a weight I couldn't shake. I needed to see Robert one more time, not for him, but for myself. Margaret tried to talk me out of it. "Emily, you don't owe him anything. Seeing him could set back all the progress you've made." My therapist said the same thing, concerned that facing him might re-traumatize me. But I was firm in my decision. "I spent my whole life afraid of him," I explained to them, trying to earn his approval, believing his narrative about who I was. I need to go as the person I am now, not as his victim, but as someone who survived him and rebuilt her life. I need to see him in that cage and know that he can never hurt me again. My mother understood immediately. When I told her my plan, she took my hands and looked into my eyes. When I was in Rosewood, I fantasized about the day I'd face him as a free woman while he was imprisoned. It was what kept me sane. "Go, sweetheart. Say what you need to say." The Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, Oregon was exactly what I expected: cold, institutional, brutally utilitarian. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered, the smell of industrial cleaner failing to mask something more human and desperate underneath. I went through security, surrendered my belongings, and was led to a visiting room divided by thick plexiglass. I sat down and waited. When they brought Robert in, I barely recognized him. 6 months in federal prison had stripped away everything that made him Robert Parker, successful businessman. He wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame. His hair was completely gray now, uncombed. His face was gaunt, the expensive spa treatments and tailored suits that had maintained his image of success now just a memory. He looked smaller, somehow diminished, the veneer of power and control completely gone. He picked up the phone on his side of the glass. I picked up mine. "I didn't come here for your apology or your explanation," I said before he could speak. "I came to tell you who I really am, since you spent 34 years trying to convince me I was worthless." His eyes flickered with something surprise, maybe that I was controlling this conversation instead of him. "I run the Catherine Chen Foundation now," I continued. "In 6 months, we've helped 47 families escape abuse situations. We've provided legal aid, safe housing, financial support. I'm pursuing a business degree part-time so I can expand our reach. I signed a book deal to tell my story, and it's already helping other women recognize the signs of financial and psychological abuse in their own families. Sophie is training to become a counselor for trauma survivors. Mom is painting again and volunteers with organizations that help victims of unlawful conservatorship." I leaned forward slightly. "Everything you tried to destroy, I've turned into strength. Every lie you told me about myself, I've replaced with truth. The foundation you tried to steal from me is now helping hundreds of people. The daughter you tried to make invisible is now very, very visible." For the first time in my life, I saw something real cross Robert's face. Not the calculated masks he'd worn for decades, but actual exhaustion, defeat, maybe even a flicker of honest reflection. "I knew you weren't mine from the day you were born," he said quietly. "You looked like James Chen. Same eyes, same way of tilting your head when you were thinking. Every time I looked at you, I saw Mary's choice to be with someone else first. I saw my own inadequacy, the fact that I was second choice, a backup plan." He stared down at his hands. "I told myself I was being generous, providing for you, giving you my name when you had none, that you should be grateful. But the truth is, I punished you for existing. I punished Mary for having loved someone before me. I punished Sophie for being proof of Mary's past. I built an entire life on control and punishment because I was terrified of being exposed as ordinary, as insufficient as the man who was never anyone's first choice." It wasn't an apology. Robert Parker wasn't capable of apologizing. But it was an admission, a moment of truth from a man who'd built his whole existence on lies. "I didn't come here for your redemption," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I came to witness your consequences. And now I can leave knowing you'll die in here forgotten, while the women you tried to destroy are out there thriving." I hung up the phone while he was still talking, his mouth moving behind the plexiglass, words I would never hear. I stood, turned my back on him, and walked out of that visiting room without looking back. The drive back to Seattle took 3 hours. About halfway there, I pulled into a rest stop overlooking the Columbia River. I sat in my car, windows down, breathing in the clean air, and finally allowed myself to cry. Not tears of sadness or anger or even relief. These were tears of release, of ending, of finally being free from the psychological prison I'd carried inside myself for 34 years. When the tears stopped, I felt lighter than I'd ever felt in my life. I started the car and drove home. After my visit to the prison, I came home to find Sophie waiting outside my apartment. She'd called ahead asking if she could come by, and I'd said yes, even though our relationship was still tentative, still fragile with all the hurt between us. She looked different than she had even a few months ago, simpler, more grounded. She'd cut her hair short, wore jeans and a plain sweater instead of the designer clothes that had once defined her. "I moved out of the apartment Dad paid for," she said as I let her inside. "Got a studio in Capitol Hill that I can afford on my salary from the crisis center. I gave away everything he bought me, the furniture, the clothes, all of it. I only kept what I earned myself or what I could prove came from Mom or Grandma Catherine." She sat on my couch and pulled out a thick envelope. "I've been in therapy twice a week for 6 months, working through everything, the manipulation, the guilt, the role I played in your suffering. My therapist suggested I write this. She handed me the envelope. It's an apology, a real one. Not just I'm sorry for everything, but specific apologies for specific things I did or didn't do. I opened it and saw pages and pages of Sophie's handwriting. Each paragraph addressed a different incident, a different moment when she'd stayed silent or accepted benefits while watching me struggle. The time she got a brand new car for her 16th birthday while I was taking the bus. The Christmas she received a laptop while I got socks. The dozens of times she heard our father dismiss my accomplishments and said nothing. Every moment of complicity catalogued and acknowledged. I can't change what I did, Sophie said, tears already streaming down her face. I can't give you back those years, but I can show up every day as a different person than I was. I'm working at a domestic violence nonprofit now, counseling other people who were used as pawns in family power struggles. I'm using my story to help them see the patterns I couldn't see in my own life, and I want to be the sister to you that I should have been all along if you'll let me. I didn't forgive her immediately. Forgiveness isn't something you can force or rush, and what Sophie had done or failed to do had real consequences that shaped my entire life. But over the months that followed, we began building something new. Not the relationship we'd had as children where I was invisible and she was cherished, but something based on honesty and mutual respect. She started volunteering at the foundation, and her insight into family manipulation proved invaluable. She could spot the patterns other counselors missed because she'd lived them. We attended joint therapy sessions to process our shared trauma, sitting in a room together, and finally saying all the things we'd never been able to say before. When I was working on my book, I included a chapter from Sophie's perspective, letting her tell her own story of being weaponized against our mother. Trust rebuilt slowly like scar tissue forming over a wound different from the original but strong in its own way. One afternoon, sitting in a coffee shop near the foundation office, I looked at my sister and said what I'd been thinking for weeks. We're not blood sisters, I said. Well, we're half-sisters, but that's not what I mean. We're survival sisters. We both survived him, and now we're both building something from the wreckage. That means something too. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. A few weeks later, she showed up at my apartment again, this time with a cashier's check in her hand. I've been working with an accountant, she said, trying to trace every dollar Dad gave me that came from your inheritance. I sold everything I couldn't prove I earned myself: jewelry, my car, everything. This is $127,000. It doesn't come close to the full $425,000 he stole from you, but it's what I can give back. I stared at the check, overwhelmed. I hadn't asked for this, hadn't even expected it. I know you'll probably put it all into the foundation anyway, Sophie continued. But I need you to know that I'm trying to make restitution. I need to do something to balance the scales, even if I can never fully make up for what happened. Keep half, I said finally. Put it toward your therapy, your education, building your own life. You were a victim too, Sophie. You deserve resources to heal. Sophie broke down completely then, and I found myself holding her while she sobbed, feeling genuine compassion instead of the resentment that had defined our relationship for so long. When she'd calmed down, she reached into her bag and pulled out one more item, a worn journal with a fabric cover. I found this in Mom's things. She must have hidden it before the accident. I think you should have it. I opened the journal and saw my mother's handwriting filling the pages. Love letters to both of us, advice for our futures, stories about our childhoods. And on the very last page, dated just days before she was pushed down those stairs, a note that made my breath catch. If Emily is reading this, it means she found the truth. Baby girl, I'm so proud of you. Remember, you were always the strongest one. Now show Sophie how to be strong too. Take care of each other. That's how you defeat him, by refusing to be turned against each other. While Sophie and I were rebuilding our relationship, my mother was creating an entirely new life for herself. She spent months in intensive therapy, working through not just the 3 years of medical trauma at Rosewood, but the 30 years of psychological abuse that had preceded it. One of her first acts of reclamation was legal. She changed her name back to Mary Chen, shedding the Parker name that had defined her imprisonment. She found a small house in Ballard, a cozy craftsman with big windows that let in light. I helped her move in, watching as she filled every room with plants, ferns and orchids and succulents, living things she could nurture and watch grow. She adopted 2 cats, from a shelter older cats that had been overlooked because everyone wanted kittens. She named them Courage and Hope. For 3 years in that place, I had no choices, she told me one afternoon as we arranged furniture in her living room. Every decision was made for me. When I woke up, what I ate, what I wore, who I spoke to, whether I could go outside or have a pen or make a phone call. Now I make 1,000 tiny choices every day, and each one feels like an act of defiance. I choose what to have for breakfast. I choose to paint in the afternoon. I choose to stay up late reading or go to bed early. They're small things, but they're mine. She'd started painting again, something she'd done before she married Robert, but had abandoned because he'd called it a waste of time. Her watercolors were beautiful landscapes of Washington coastlines, forest scenes, the play of light through trees. A local gallery in Ballard started displaying them, and to her surprise, they sold. She wasn't trying to be famous or make a living from art. She was simply reclaiming a part of herself that Robert had tried to erase. But perhaps her most important work was at the foundation. She began volunteering specifically with older women who'd been trapped in abusive marriages for decades, women who believed it was too late to start over. I was 61 when I finally got free, she told them in group sessions I sometimes observed. I spent 3 years in psychiatric imprisonment being told I was crazy, that no one cared about me, that I'd never escape. And I'm here to tell you it's never too late. You are not too old, not too damaged, not too far gone. If I can rebuild at 64, anyone can. What made her testimony so powerful was her honesty. She didn't sugarcoat the difficulty of starting over. She talked about the nightmares that still woke her up, the moments when she'd break down crying for no apparent reason. The challenge of learning to trust her own judgment again after years of being told she was delusional. But she was living proof that escape was possible, that healing was possible, that life could begin again, even after decades of darkness. The women she counseled often cried when they met her. "I thought I was alone," they'd say. Or, "I didn't think anyone would understand." Mary understood completely in ways that even the professional therapists couldn't. One Saturday, Margaret invited us both to visit James Chen's grave. I'd never been there before, hadn't even known where he was buried. We drove to a cemetery in North Seattle, and Margaret led us to a simple granite headstone under a maple tree. James Michael Chen, it read, 1967 to 1997. Beloved son taken too soon. Margaret placed flowers at the base of the stone, and my mother did the same. I stood between them, these 2 women who had both loved this man I would never know. "I wish you could have known him," Margaret said to me, her voice thick with emotion. "He was gentle and funny and brilliant. He wanted to be a teacher, thought he could change the world one student at a time. He would have been so proud of the woman you've become." My mother added softly, "I married Robert because I was scared to be alone, scared to be judged for being a single mother in 1997. I thought I was protecting you by giving you a father's name, a stable home. But I just trapped us both. I'm sorry I didn't choose better, Emily." I took her hand. "You chose to protect me the best way you knew how, with the information and resources you had. And when the moment came to tell the truth and stop him, you did. That's what matters now." We stood there together for a long time, 3 generations of women who had all survived Robert Parker's cruelty, paying respects to the man whose death had set everything in motion. 6 months into her new life, my mother called me with a tremor in her voice I hadn't heard since we'd freed her from Rosewood. "Emily, I need your advice about something. I received a letter today from Rosewood Psychiatric Facility. The state is investigating them for improper commitment practices and patient abuse. They're asking if I'd be willing to testify in the investigation. It could lead to the facility being shut down and criminal charges against staff members." She paused, and I could hear her breathing, working to stay calm. "They want me to go back there. Not as a patient, but as a witness. I don't know if I can face that place again. but I keep thinking about how many other people might be trapped there right now, people whose families don't know they're alive. What do I do? I told my mother she should testify against Rosewood that facing that place one more time as a free woman with power instead of as a prisoner would be the ultimate reclamation. She did, and 6 months later the facility was shut down. 3 staff members were criminally charged, and 12 patients who'd been improperly committed were freed. My mother's courage had a ripple effect far beyond our family. That same momentum carried into the Catherine Chen Foundation's first full year of operation. I stood before our board of directors, Margaret, my mother Sophie, and 3 other advocates for family violence prevention, presenting our annual impact report. The numbers told a story I could barely believe we'd accomplished in just 12 months. We'd helped 47 families escape abusive situations, provided legal aid in 23 custody and divorce cases, funded safe housing for 31 women and children who had nowhere else to go, launched a financial literacy program that taught abuse survivors how to open bank accounts. Their abusers couldn't access how to build credit in their own names, how to hide money legally for emergency escapes. I'd hired a staff of 5, all survivors themselves, creating an organization that understood trauma from the inside out. My father thought he was destroying me, I told the board as I concluded the presentation. Instead, he was teaching me exactly what weapons abuse survivors need to escape. We know his tactics because we lived them: the financial control, the gaslighting, the way he made us question our own reality. Now we use that knowledge to dismantle those same tactics for other families. Every time we help someone escape, we're taking something he tried to use to break us and turning it into power. The foundation's work led to something I never expected: a book deal. My literary agent, a woman named Rachel, who'd found me through a news article about the trial, convinced me that my story needed to be told in full. The Inheritance of Silence. One Woman's Fight to Reclaim Her Life from Family Betrayal was published 10 months after Robert's conviction, and to my shock, it became a bestseller. Suddenly I was doing interviews on NPR, appearing on morning shows, speaking at conferences about financial abuse and conservatorship reform. People recognized me in grocery stores and coffee shops, approaching nervously to say, "Thank you for telling your story," or "You gave me the courage to leave my husband." The attention was surreal and sometimes overwhelming. I was private by nature, someone who'd spent her whole life trying to be invisible. But I learned to use the platform for change. I testified before the state legislature about mandatory oversight for conservatorships. I worked with lawmakers to draft bills requiring stricter penalties for financial elder abuse. I pushed for laws requiring that adult children be notified directly when they're named in wills or trusts, so no one else could intercept that information the way my father had. Some of these efforts succeeded, others stalled in committee, but the conversation itself felt like progress. The foundation also launched a fellowship program for young lawyers and social workers who wanted to specialize in family abuse cases. We received 4 applications for every position resumes from people who'd been drawn to this work because of their own family experiences or because they were tired of seeing wealthy abusers escape consequences. I found myself mentoring these young advocates, and in teaching them, I learned how much I'd grown. "You'll lose cases," I told our first cohort of fellows honestly during their orientation. "You'll have clients who go back to their abusers because leaving feels more dangerous than staying. You'll have days when you feel like you're drowning in other people's trauma when you go home and cry because you couldn't save someone who needed saving. And you have to learn to set boundaries to protect your own mental health while still showing up for this work. Remember that every small victory matters, every person who escapes, every child who's protected, every dollar we help someone hide from an abuser. We can't save everyone, but everyone we do save is a life reclaimed." We held our first annual fundraising gala on a rainy November evening, exactly 2 years after the night my car had disappeared from that hospital parking lot. The event drew 300 people: donors, advocates, survivors, media. I was exhausted from preparation, my feet already aching in heels I wasn't used to wearing, but I smiled and shook hands and told abbreviated versions of my story dozens of times. Near the end of the evening, a woman approached me nervously, a teenage girl by her side. The woman was in her 40s with tired eyes and hands that twisted anxiously around her purse strap. The girl was maybe 15, thin and pale, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Miss Parker, my name is Jennifer. This is my daughter Hannah." The woman's voice shook. 6 months ago, Hannah told me her stepfather was abusing her. I believed her immediately. I called the police, got a restraining order, started divorce proceedings. But he's wealthy and connected, and somehow the investigation went nowhere. The restraining order got dismissed. His lawyers are arguing for shared custody. She was crying now. "I saw you on TV and I thought, I hoped. Is there any way your foundation might help us? Because I'm out of options and I'm terrified he's going to hurt her again." I looked at Hannah, saw myself at her age, and knew exactly what I was going to say. I took Jennifer and Hannah's case personally. Working with their attorneys, I used every tactic I'd learned from my own battle: meticulous documentation, financial forensics, pattern recognition that others had dismissed. We discovered that Hannah's stepfather had been accused of inappropriate behavior by 3 other girls over the past decade, but his wealth and connections had made those cases disappear. When we finally got him to trial, the jury convicted him in less than 4 hours. Hannah, now 16, asked to meet me privately after the sentencing. We sat in a quiet conference room at the foundation, and she looked at me with eyes that had seen too much, too young. "You saved my life," she said simply. "Not just from him, but from thinking I had to stay quiet to keep the peace, from believing that protecting my family's reputation was more important than my safety. You showed me that telling the truth isn't selfish. It's survival. And someday when I'm ready, I want to help people the way you helped me." I saw myself in her fierce determination and made her a promise. "When you're ready, when you're healed and strong, there will be a place for you here. We need people who understand what this fight costs and why it matters." 3 years have passed since that conversation. It's a crisp October morning now, and I'm standing at my office window in the Foundation's new downtown building, watching ferries cross Elliott Bay. I'm 37 years old, and I barely recognize the woman I used to be. My hair is shorter, easier to manage. There's a confidence in my posture that wasn't there before, a groundedness that comes from knowing exactly who I am. The walls of my office are covered with photographs, families we've helped, staff members who've become like family, and prominently displayed a framed picture of my grandmother Catherine that Margaret gave me. On my desk sits a potted peony plant, one my mother brings me every spring, as a living connection to the garden where truth was buried and then unearthed. My life looks nothing like it did 4 years ago. I own my apartment, now paid for with book royalties. I have genuine friendships not shadowed by manipulation or fear. I'm dating Michael, a high school English teacher who makes me laugh and never asks me to be anything other than exactly who I am. My relationship with my mother is close and healthy, built on honesty and proper boundaries. Sophie and I have lunch every week, and she's finishing her master's degree in social work. I've built a life that is authentically mine, not a performance, not a survival strategy, but real. That evening, I sit at my desk and do something I've been thinking about for weeks. I write a letter to the version of myself who stood in that rainy parking lot 4 years ago, devastated and alone. "Dear Emily," I begin. "Right now, you feel like you've lost everything. Your car, your sense of safety, your illusions about family. You're about to discover losses even deeper. Your mother's freedom, your inheritance, the truth about your father. You're going to have moments when you want to give up, when staying silent seems easier than fighting, when you question whether you're strong enough to face all of this. I'm writing from the other side to tell you, you are strong enough. You will not only survive this, you will transform it into something meaningful. The pain you're feeling right now will become wisdom. The betrayal will become discernment. The anger will become purpose. And one day you'll stand in your office overlooking the water and realize that losing everything you thought defined you is actually the beginning of discovering who you really are. Keep going. Keep telling the truth. Keep fighting. It's worth it. You're worth it. Love, Emily, the woman you're becoming. The following weekend, my mother, Sophie, Margaret, Michael, and I drive to the beach outside Seattle where my mother took me as a child, the same beach where that photograph was taken all those years ago. My mother sets up her easel to paint the sunset. Sophie and her girlfriend spread out a blanket and open a bottle of wine. Margaret tells stories about my grandmother, Catherine, and my biological father, James, keeping their memories alive. I walk to the water's edge, alone, reaching into my pocket for something I've carried for 4 years. The key to the Camry that was never really mine. The key that started everything. I've kept it as a reminder of where I came from, of what I survived. Now, standing with the ocean breeze in my hair and the sound of my family laughing behind me, I realize I don't need it anymore. I throw the key as far as I can, watching it arc through the air and disappear beneath the waves. "What was that?" Michael asks, coming up beside me. "The past," I say simply. "I don't need to carry it anymore." As the sun sets over the Pacific, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I feel something I've never quite felt before: complete peace. Not the absence of pain or the erasure of trauma, but the hard-won serenity of someone who has faced the absolute worst and emerged not just intact, but transformed. The cycle of silence, shame, and control that defined generations of my family ends with me. The legacy I'm leaving is different. Truth, courage, and the unshakable belief that no one, no matter how powerful, no matter how revered, no matter how much they claim to act out of love, has the right to make you invisible. My phone buzzes in my pocket. Another email, another woman asking for help, another story waiting to be told, another life waiting to be reclaimed. I smile because I know exactly what to do. That's my story. 4 years ago, I was standing in a rain-soaked parking lot, staring at an empty space where my car should have been feeling like my world was ending. I had no idea that moment would be the beginning of something so much bigger than a stolen vehicle. I didn't know that I was about to uncover decades of betrayal, financial fraud, and a crime so calculated it would take my breath away. I couldn't have imagined that my mother wasn't dead, that she'd been imprisoned for 3 years, or that everything I believed about my family was a carefully constructed lie. But here's what I learned through all of it. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for becoming the person you were always meant to be. Losing my car led me to find my mother. Discovering my father's theft led me to reclaim not just my inheritance, but my identity. Being made invisible my entire life taught me how to help other invisible people find their voices. If you're listening to this and you see yourself in any part of my story, if you've been the overlooked child, the silenced spouse, the family member whose needs always come last, I want you to know something. You are not crazy. You are not overreacting. You are not being dramatic. If your gut is telling you something is wrong, trust it. Document everything. Tell someone outside the family. Don't let anyone convince you that keeping the peace is more important than keeping yourself safe. And if you're in a situation right now where you feel trapped, where leaving seems impossible because of money or fear or the belief that no one will help you, please know this: there are people and organizations ready to help. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be the perfect victim with all the evidence lined up. You just have to take the first step, and there will be hands reaching out to catch you. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own family dynamics, or gave you courage to speak up about something you've been hiding, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling me what part of this journey affected you most, or if you have your own story of family betrayal and survival. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And sometimes just knowing you're not alone is the beginning of healing. And please, if you found value in hearing my story, subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss future stories of survival, justice, and transformation. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Because every time we speak truth about family abuse, financial manipulation, or psychological control, we make it a little bit easier for the next person to come forward. The foundation I run, the Catherine Chen Foundation for Family Justice, exists because one woman, my grandmother, believed that knowledge and resources could set people free. If you or someone you know needs help escaping an abusive family situation, information about support resources is linked below. No one should have to fight alone. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for bearing witness to my mother's imprisonment, my sister's redemption, and my journey from invisible daughter to someone who refuses to be silenced ever again. The car my father gave away was just a car, but what I gained in fighting to get justice was so much more. I gained myself. Until next time, remember your truth is your power. Never let anyone take that away from you.